We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. We're back once again. Tom still a logo. How are repairs going? Long pause.
Well, pause for dramatic effect. Yes. So I think we have initial check coming.
Okay.
That we'll use to pay for stuff that's already been done as far as the remediation.
Gotcha.
And then I think that the repair quote thing that they're doing, that's all been finally approved.
Okay.
And we're now on the schedule. Does that mean? I don't know what that means.
I mean, it's more than absolutely nothing. So that's
yes, it is more than nothing.
Yeah.
So
all right. Well, there goes that. Let's see. On my end of things, NHL preseason hockey started.
It's very exciting.
I don't have super high hopes for my Vancouver Canucks this year, but then again, last year I had higher hopes for them and they did really, really poorly, so maybe there'll be reverse psychology and everything will work out absolutely swimmingly, although it's very, very evident that if any of the Canucks' top players get injured, they are absolutely boned because the difference between their NHL roster of we've got 20 actual NHL players. You're supposed to have 23. And everybody below that is a gigantic chasm in skill levels. So they have no one to call up if anybody gets hurt. That's basically what's going to go on. Very fun for anyone who likes hockey.
My wife and I have been watching gymnastics competitions. From I think the U.S. championship, the one with the Simone Biles got her 8th all around, whatever.
Yep. Yeah, she is rocking it.
Yeah, I know. And it's interesting to watch.
Sure.
It's insane when it's like I can't, my brain can't comprehend what I'm seeing. I used to be able to watch gymnastics and go, oh, they did a double or they did a single or whatever. Now it's like, what happened? What did they do?
Yeah.
Because it was just it's fast. I feel like for those of you that are Dragon Ball Z fans, I feel like it's when those fight scenes are happening and the normal people are staring and they go, they disappeared. Where are they? And all the fighters are the eyes are darting around because their eyes are fast enough because they're martial arts trained enough to be able to see these people moving so quickly because they're such fast martial whatever. That's what I feel like.
You know what? Maybe we need higher frame rate cameras finally. Maybe it's an actual reason to go higher. Because most television is still actually done at 30 frames per second because they're still basing it on the old 60 interlaced fields per second, which equates to 30 frames per second. So maybe we genuinely need the 120.
Even when they slow it down, right? You see somebody hit the vault, right? And they hit they do some sort of flip before they get to the little spring pad and they spring off of it and they hit it with their hands. And if you watch it in slow motion, it doesn't they're not even straight in the air. They're still turning as they hit this thing. And I'm like, how are you are you pushing off or are you just bouncing? What's happening?
Or sometimes
what
in the
are
slow-mo
physics of this?
Yeah, sometimes in the slow-mo they're still moving upwards when it seems like gravity definitely should have taken over by that point.
Yes. And you're all these I don't understand why all these gymnasts are so short. Are you kidding me? Any growth plates in their bodies were absolutely compressed into non-existence.
Seems to be the case.
Fair
enough.
It's extremely impressive, but at the same time, it is as superhuman as you can imagine. And even
absolutely shocking that any of them might be using some sort of performance enhancers. How could that possibly be?
I don't know what performance enhancer you would take.
No kidding, right?
What would you take? What would be the drug that would give you the bounce?
All of the steroids and growth hormones, and I would not come relatively close to any of that.
You could fill me up with flubber, and I wouldn't be able to bounce that high.
Well, anyway, we have oodles and oodles of questions to get to, and we're already talking about what we watched, so why don't we just head right on into it?
Whatever.
Yeah, although Tom didn't write anything down on his list, you're still watching Rebels, right? Star Wars Rebels, continuing on. That's Tom's
very
contribution. That's okay.
Still haven't watched the second half of Iron Man 2 with my son because
Wonderful.
he's got too much homework. So
yeah, such a topical and timely movie.
Very timely.
But I did watch a couple of movies this week, and I don't mind talking about both of them. So I had not actually seen X.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, so that's Mia Goth. It's the one that kind of really put her on the map. Brittany Snow is in this movie as well. A couple other co-stars. So it's set in the 70s. I really liked the way that they did the setting. Felt really, quite authentic to the way that everything was filmed. This was shot on a low budget, but they put their money to very good use. This movie looks really good. So it's ostensibly a horror film. It is a bunch of teenagers, or I guess they're not all teenagers. Some of them are adults, but they're going off out to a secluded area, and deaths are going to happen, and there's some gore and all that type of stuff. But honestly, the overall tone of the thing was like more towards sadness than anything. If I had to put that on there, it was really well done. I really like this movie. I can see why it got a lot of praise. Mia Goth also does a double performance that is really terrific. I can see why this put her on the map. Because you're not even necessarily going to guess the second character that she's playing is immediately her playing it. That's how much she disappears into the second role, and it isn't completely obvious that she's playing two parts in this movie. So yeah, highly recommend that. I'll be checking out the sequel that came out in the very same year as a surprise, which is called Pearl, which is actually like a prequel to this movie. So I'll be checking that out soon. And then Maxine is the third one that I don't think has come out yet, or something like that. It's not on streaming yet anyway. But yeah, interesting series there. And then the other movie that I saw, also ostensibly a horror movie, called No One Will Save You.
Oh, that one looks interesting.
It is. Just came out, 2023 movie. It's on Disney Plus in Canada. It's on Hulu, I believe, in the States. So this is starring Caitlin Dever, and she is basically the only person in this movie. There are a couple of little ancillary characters who show up on screen, but don't really do a whole lot. It's pretty much just her all by herself in this movie. She was an executive producer on this, so definitely... had a big hand in everything with the making of this movie and starring in this movie. I don't know if I want to give away too much. I mean, the overall plot that you're going to see in the synopsis is that it's a woman on her own against an alien invasion. But there's all kinds of twists and turns. Yeah, it is definitely not that dissimilar from Nope. It's much more of a metaphor than it is a literal story. I mean, you can watch it as a literal story, but the ending isn't really going to make sense as a true literal ending. It works much better as a metaphor, and it's quite strong on that front. But yeah, the big calling card of this movie is that there is almost no dialogue. Because she's all by herself, and it's an alien invasion. She doesn't have anybody to talk to, but they don't have her doing the thing of just talking to herself or just cursing out loud all the time like you see in some other movies. It's like, well, she's got no one to talk to. She needs to stay...
That's just not realistic, I'm going to be honest with you.
I know, but
I
also...
talk to myself constantly.
She needs to stay quiet because the aliens have very good hearing. There's a little bit of almost like a quiet place to this as well. Now... I want to say
The Descent, or like 1,000 other movies.
That's right.
But yes, go
on. So I want to say on the technical side of this, watching it on Disney Plus for me, I don't know if this is going to be the same on Hulu in the US, but Disney Plus is always, as we've mentioned many times, quieter than other streaming services. They seem to just send out the signal at about -6 or -10 compared to
That's gotten better, I think, in the recent releases.
Well, this one
over here,
No One Will Save You via Disney Plus up here in Canada. Not only would have been like 6 decibels quieter than every other streaming service, it was also 10 decibels quieter than everything else on Disney Plus. This is the first movie in a long time that on my AV receiver, I went into the plus territory on my master volume. It was really quite necessary to go into the plus territory. And I usually don't listen quite at 0 dB on my master volume. Most other content, I'm, usually around -5 or so like that on or minus, between -5, -10 on Disney Plus. I'm sometimes right up there at 0 dB, but this one I was up at like +7. But you know what? this No One Will Save You movie, it's really important that you do have the volume up, because a huge amount of the experience of this movie is the sound, even though there's not dialogue going on the vast majority of the time. It is the sound. Any of the scares that are happening are very reliant on audio cues, and if you don't have the volume up, you're just going to miss a huge portion of the experience of this movie. So if it's that quiet on Hulu as well, or wherever you are able to find and watch this movie, crank it up. Please crank it up. And if it is that much quieter than even other content on your streaming service, I wouldn't be shocked, because that's the way it came across when I watched it. I did want to mention, like, on that whole not very much dialogue thing, I got a little bit annoyed because they did have a whole bunch of, like, her breathing sounds. You know, sighs and just quick breath and that type of stuff. And they kind of, like, enhanced it in the mix a bit, since there is so little else in the way of anything that she's saying out loud. So that is a thing I've mentioned before, although her performance didn't do the just, I'm stressed out, so I'm going to be hyperventilating 100% of this movie. At least as a performance, she didn't do that, but they did sort of enhance any sort of breath sounds, which got a little bit annoying once in a while. But it's a quick movie, tight 90, and I can recommend that one too. It's a neat movie, even if you're not super in love with the plot. It's a neat movie to watch on a technical level, on a performance level. Well worth it. There we go.
I will say, I just remember while you were talking that my wife did the thing I'm sure many of you have experienced, where she looked at you in all seriousness and said, "Have you heard of," and then finished the sentence with something so blatantly obvious that it's hilarious. And she looked at me, she said, "Oh, I just heard of this show I really want to watch. It's called Welcome to Wrexham." I was like,
yes.
Have you lost your mind? I'm like, did you abstain from social media last year? Because they were advertising the crap out of this. So my son just got home and is, for whatever reason, deciding to use the front door.
That's okay.
Garage door. So
you're not on video, so there's no worries about any privacy concerns.
I know, but still, if you guys are hearing that, that's what it is.
Okay. It's just
so she's like, "Oh yeah, I just heard of this new show." I'm like, "It's not new. I can't believe you've never heard of it."
It's definitely not new, because they're like 2 seasons behind now in the real world.
So, you know, whatever. We watched the first episode, and it was, the first episode was a little slow. I mean, you kind of knew what was going to happen, or there wouldn't have been a second episode. I guess, yeah. You know, but it was pretty funny.
It's a very entertaining series.
All right, well, we'll be watching that.
Yes.
All right. Let's see. Yes.
Yeah. Let's kick right into things.
So we want to start the podcast. This is the AVRant podcast, where we answer your home theater and AV questions. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to our website, find our episodes as well as our show notes. That includes links to a Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You can find us at facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant, where those same pictures will be included in the video, as well as just our recording sessions, except I'm just a logo right now until my theater gets fixed, but we will see. Contact us directly. Rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at, I don't have a Twitter.
It's still there in the lower third. You can try, but I don't think Tom can even log into his account anymore. I'm pretty sure it got closed from when he got hacked and never bothered to fix it, because why bother?
Why bother? I just don't.
Indeed.
All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you have to support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and send us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Paul for, I was looking at the wrong line going, that's not the right name.
You did write one in there.
I did. I want to thank Paul for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Paul, for that PayPal donation. Very much appreciate your financial support.
If you want to give us a monthly, you don't have to reoccurring donation, you can do that through PayPal, or you can go to patreon.com/AVRant podcast and sign up there to become one of our patrons. So right now we have 135 patrons at patreon.com, including Aras. So thank you very much.
That's right. I was very pleasantly surprised to see that number actually go up, since we just entered the new month of October, and I was expecting at least a couple of credit cards to expire, but I guess not. And we even gained one there. So yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up and join our 135 patrons, and Aras, thank you very much for being one of them.
I have the joy of having a wife who loses a credit card at least once a year. So I get new credit card numbers all the time. It's very convenient. I'm going to be honest with you. It's quite convenient. I'm like, can you just replace her credit card and not mine? But they're like, no, you guys both get one. But I really don't want to. Mine's not been compromised. We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through, I don't know, there's stuff happening.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure. I think that my government almost shut down, so there was that.
Oh, that seems to be a perpetual threat in the U.S. I hear about that in the news quite frequently.
Yeah, well, that's how you get if you're a congressperson or a senator or whatever who wants to get in the news all the time. You shut the government down, or almost.
Yes,
and then you yell at everybody else for it being their fault.
Hear about Canada's political gigantic faux pas in Parliament? That didn't make the news south of the border. I don't know if I even want to mention it. It was pretty bad. Really,
did somebody poop on the floor? I mean, what?
You know what? I gotta say it was worse than that. I mean, I guess I'll just say the story not to leave everybody in suspense who hasn't heard of it. Basically, we had the Ukrainian president came over for a visit there. While they were there, the Speaker of the House for our parliament had invited a Ukrainian veteran from World War II, not realizing that at that time the Ukrainians were fighting Russia, and Russia were our allies in World War II, which meant that that veteran was fighting on the side of the Nazis.
Oops.
And they gave him a standing ovation while the Ukrainian president was there. You know, really good look. Yeah.
Well, history is hard. It's hard to remember things, especially when you don't bother looking them up.
You might have wanted to look it up. Yeah. I can see the thought process. I mean, Ukrainian president's coming. We're going to honor a Ukrainian veteran. I can see that thought process. That part really isn't bad. You just might have wanted to look at the very publicly available history, because even though this guy is a veteran from World War II, he actually had like a social media presence where it was pretty obvious which side he fought on. So, yeah, that's, there you go. Canadian politics too, huh?
Well, I mean, we did something similar to that recently, right? I think we had somebody come up to do like the Pledge of Allegiance or something, and they were like a convicted felon murderer or something like that. I don't know. Let's be honest.
Do a little background check, folks. Do a little background check.
There is no written test to become a politician.
Right.
There's none of that. So. Anyways,
yeah, that's not what
notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Ryan, Dave, Kris, who says he likes the podcast so much he sometimes listens to episodes twice. Wow. Who's got the time?
He does.
Jim, is it Toke? I don't remember.
Yep, it is Toke.
Toke is, in Denmark. Toke says he sends repeated and continuous thanks for powering through whatever life throws our way to continue the podcast. For him, it's a highlight in the middle of each and every week. Rob, Jason, and Aras. Aras has been very busy, but he managed to watch us on YouTube every week and wants to send his best wishes to Tom during his flood repairs. He wanted to share that he's very content with everything in his home theater now. We might recall that he built his own cabinets to create on-ceiling Atmos speakers from his in-ceiling CAFs, but one of them fell off the ceiling at one point. He spent a lot of time, and now they're super secure, so all worked out eventually. I do remember that.
Yes, indeed. So. Very glad that you are fully satisfied and happy with your home theater now. They turned out to be lovely gloss cabinets that he made there. They look fantastic. So yes, you know what? I mean, chalk it up to a learning experience. Obviously, we'd rather not go through something like that, but now he knows with a very high level of confidence that they are not going to fall off the ceiling. So that is good, and we'll chalk it up to that.
I'll be honest, man. I work on bikes all the time. I set up a trainer in here, which is like it holds the back wheel, and then you can cycle inside. Not for me, because I'm not going to use it, but my son is going through physical therapy, and every physical therapist is like, aren't you a cyclist? Yes. Don't you have an indoor trainer? I'm like, no. So I took one of my old bikes and I set up an indoor trainer. I keep looking at it like, I don't trust it.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't like, I know it's secure, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, because it wasn't built as a stationary bike. You've converted a regular bike into a stationary bike.
Which people do all the time, and that's what this thing is supposed to do. And I did everything right, and I know it's in there tightly, but I'm always like, I
if something fell, it wouldn't be the shock of shocks.
Yeah,
I get you.
So putting the speaker over my head that I built up there doesn't inspire confidence. All right, in the news, it's ended the road for Zappiti. The French company has been shut down for good, and it will be impossible to continue using the Zappiti video player or to download any new metadata by the end of the year. For anyone unfamiliar, Zappiti sold media players that could play back full ISO or file folder backups of disks stored on hard drives, and they even sold a NAS unit with a disk drive that automated the disk backup process. Unsurprisingly, that brought lawsuits that the company has been fighting for years, but now they've lost and Zappiti is no more. If you're using a Zappiti system, you can continue to use your offline collection, but you won't be able to pull down metadata for any new titles that you add. The Zappiti video player will stop working, but you can still use the Explorer to select titles and use other video playback software such as VLC. They have handed off repair and warranty services to Let's Get Physical Distribution, Inc. Boy, that sounds like it's another fly-by-night place. Yeah. They will totally be around forever because anybody who named their company after that Olivia Newton-John's song is just...
Well, I mean, it is Let's Get Physical Distribution altogether because it's physical distribution and discs and that.
I got it.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Shut
up. And they say they're working on a solution that would let them send one last update to their players to switch it over to an Android-based system with a whole new content library and player, but you'd have to start from scratch to reassemble your entire content library if that happens. So,
and also,
and it'll totally break it, and it will never work again.
I mean, are we going to trust that this had thorough troubleshooting and that things like your automatic frame rate switching and whatnot is all going to work seamlessly? I would put absolutely zero trust into that.
I don't know if you've ever heard of an alpha build, but let me tell you how the experience is like. It'll be exactly like downloading that. Just praying.
Yeah, so I mean, this is unfortunate news. I actually do have a Zappiti player, one of the Zappiti minis that was really very affordable. They stopped selling that a couple of years ago, and all of their players since then have been quite a bit more expensive. But I had a Zappiti mini, and one thing that I really like there is I have a Plex setup. I very much enjoy Plex, but the thing with the Plex setup is it doesn't play the full file folder backups or the ISO backups. You have to convert what you're backing up into an MKV file. To use it via Plex. So that means that, for anything where I want the entire disk menu structure, just to be able to go through and access special features and things like that, rather than having to manually turn each special feature into its own separate MKV file and label it and all that type of stuff. So it was kind of nice on some ones to be able to play it in the Zappiti system and just have the full ISO or the full file folder there and play it exactly like I was playing a physical disk. Furthermore, Plex's support for 3D disks, which I have to admit I'm pretty much not watching anymore, so that might just be something that finally goes by the wayside in my system. I mean, I've made it through my 3D
Welcome
collection.
to the dark side.
Yeah, I mean, it's just getting pretty tough because I do plan on replacing the Z9D in my theater with a G3 eventually, and that's not going to do 3D, so I'm like, you know what, it might just be time. But yes, I was very much using the Zappiti system for my 3D collection because it can just play the disc like it's a physical disc, including full 3D support instead of having to have the resolution like you have to if you convert it into something that Plex can understand and still play as a 3D file. So, I'm a little bit sad to see this go. The clear alternative to Zappiti right now is a Chinese-based company called Zidoo, Zidoo. They have players that are very similar. They are based on an Android system, so if Zappiti was going to end up switching over there anyway, then the Zidoo players are pretty much exactly what they're hoping to turn Zappiti into if they're even able to. But yeah, that would be the alternative if you're looking for the same thing. And the prices on the Zidoo players are not quite as high as what the Zappitis were. So that still exists. There's still an option out there for playing full ISOs and file folder backups. But it's pretty much the end of the road for Zappiti.
And I just learned about them today.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, big impact on Tom's home theater.
People are like, don't you have a media player? Listen, my man. I can barely walk from one room to the other to get a disc. You think I'm going to set up a media player? It's just, but you only have to do it once. Do you, though? Let me explain.
You do end up fiddling with any home media setup, home content library. You do end up fiddling with it.
if there were still those multi-disc players, like that 100 and 200
that Kaleidoscape used to have as well.
And then it just flipped around and found the disc for you like a jukebox.
Mm-hmm.
Then I could maybe do it. That would be how I would do it. Yeah. All right. Meta already announced their Quest 3 mixed reality headset a while back, and we already learned back then it will cost $500. I must have missed that day because this is the first time hearing of that. But now the official launch announcement has happened, and they'll start shipping on October 10th with an upgraded 512 gigabyte version available for $650. The $500 version has 128 gigabytes of storage. The 512 gigabyte version will also come with 6 months of Meta Quest Plus subscription service that gives you 2 titles per month as long as you're a subscriber, and discounts on game purchases. Not in-game purchases. But a little more interesting than that, and thanks to AVRant listener Abhu for the heads up, Meta announced that Quest 2 and Quest 3 headsets will support Xbox Cloud Gaming starting in December. There are no VR titles on Xbox Cloud Gaming, so you'll play the games on a large virtual 2D screen inside your Quest headset. So, yay, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of interesting, though, that, you can play full-on Xbox games, without owning an Xbox. You can already do that through mobile services and on some smart TVs and that, but bringing it to the Quest headset, I just thought was kind of interesting that they're willing to partner up like that, not really so concerned that you're going to buy Xbox hardware anymore, and obviously, as long as you're willing to pay the subscription to Xbox Cloud Gaming, increases the number of games that you can play inside of that Quest headset. So this will be backwards compatible with the Quest 2. It won't go all the way back to the Quest 1 because they made sure to say this will be compatible with Meta Quest headsets. I guess that would apply to the Quest Pro as well because the original was an Oculus Quest, and they're like, nope, doesn't count for that.
All right, Value Electronics held their annual TV shootout for 2023, and surprise, surprise, OLED TVs still scored the best. Sony's new A95L QD OLED was officially crowned the king of 4K TVs. Mm-hmm. But it was pretty much splitting hairs at that point. Samsung's S95, I guess 95 is the thing. So S95C QD OLED and LG's G3 Micro Lens Array W OLED were neck and neck. And right up there was Sony's model. The Hisense, Samsung, and Sharp Micro LED backlit LCD TVs all scored considerably lower across the board, even on high brightness and HDR highlight tests. So it's OLEDs clearly at the top and virtually no separation between them. And over on the 8K front, for all those people who care about bigger numbers but not increased performance that you can actually see, it was basically pointless as most of the models were holdovers for 2022, and LG's Z2 OLED won again, even though it isn't as good as the 4K resolution G3. If you're gonna be so uneducated as to buy a TV because it says 8K instead of 4K on it, then you deserve to be punished, is what they're saying. Yep. You deserve to be punished for falling for that marketing trap.
Yep.
It also has more watts. It's tough to argue anyone should get an 8K TV these days. Tough to argue. All right. So when did I write that article? Let's go see. I wrote an article on AV Gadgets that was 8K TVs are dumb.
Yes. Like for a while, to get the very largest OLED screen size, you had to go to the 8K model because they had the 88-inch 8K, and if you wanted the very largest size, that was it for a while. But now there is a 97-inch, although not in the is there a G3 97? No, they're holding over the G2 because they didn't put the micro lens array into the 97-inch screen size. So that's still a holdover there. But I mean, the very largest OLED screen size is a 4K, not an 8K. That's the point I'm trying to make. But yeah, in out-and-out performance terms, the G3 outperforms the Z2 at this point. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be the people who are like, okay, the Sony A95L, it was crowned the king of 4K TVs, so it must be the very best. But it's like, just look at the actual differences between any of the top 3 OLEDs, and it's like, any of them are fantastic. They're all excellent, and all of them considerably better than even the very best LCDs out there. I mean, if we're, getting persnickety about, comparing it to a mastering monitor and seeing exactly the same amount of shadow detail and exactly the same amount of contrast and all that type of stuff. This is a pretty thorough test that they do on these things. But there you go. You want the best, get an OLED, and don't worry too much about which brand of OLED, because they're all fantastic.
Yes, in April 2021, 8K displays are stupid. It was written by me. And guess what? It is just as true now.
It sure is. You know what? Perhaps even more so.
I think so.
Might be even, because since then, the 4K TVs have gotten even better than they were when you wrote that article. Yeah, and they've surpassed the 8Ks.
Comments here. Scott wanted to follow up on the issue he was having when trying to play Netflix on his NVIDIA Shield, the tube-shaped one. He was only ever getting stereo audio, even although it was in a Dolby Digital Plus container. He could never get 5.1 output. We made some suggestions for settings to check, and it turned out he did indeed need to log into Netflix using a web browser on his computer. At the bottom of the page is a link to Profile and Parental Controls. Took him a while to look through everything to click on that one. For each individual profile, you can click a drop-down menu and select playback settings. From there, you can select data usage per screen. His was set to low, which is something we mentioned, although finding exactly where that setting was hidden took some time. So that's why he wanted to share in case anyone else is having that problem. Once he set it to high, voila, he's getting 5.1 audio now, but he also had to change the setting for his wife's profile and for his son. The setting is not global. I do seem to remember having to do that many moons ago.
But yes, I mean, this is a audio playback settings, so why you would think to check the Profile and Parental Controls as the place in which you would find that setting. And I mean, it's not even there directly. You then have to go into the playback settings per profile. So there you go, a little bit of hunting to find that. But our suggestions at least put him on the right path for what he was kind of looking for.
Sure.
And thanks to his tenacity and going through all the menus there, he did eventually find it. So glad that we were able to find a solution. That's very nice to know that that was a solvable problem. And there you go. For anyone else who might be running into that, Profile and Parental Controls on the web browser version. This is not something you find on the app itself on the NVIDIA Shield. He said he tried looking on his mobile app as well on his phone, because I had said, oh, maybe it's like on his Android phone there's that setting, and it carried over to the NVIDIA Shield. He's like, nope, wasn't on the mobile, but it was on the web page you go to in just a web browser on your computer. So there you go.
All right, Toke, appreciate that we pointed out the NAD-specific version of Dirac Live Room Correction and how the instructions for setting your speaker channel levels before you begin the measurements is a bit different on NAD receivers than what is shown in Dirac's own tutorials. Thanks to that warning, when he recently went to rerun Dirac on his NAD receiver, made sure to carefully check all the instructions and also made sure to read through the release notes when he downloaded the latest version of Dirac directly from Dirac's own website. He's glad he did. In Dirac's version archives, they mentioned that NAD owners specifically are having an issue with the newest release version of Dirac, where the volume is set too high after calibration. They suggested that NAD owners should stick with the version 3.3 for now until a fix is released. There's no mention of this anywhere on the main page, only in the version archives, so we just wanted to pass along that heads up. All right, all you NAD owners.
That is right. Yeah, if you're using NAD receiver or processor and trying to run Dirac, there is a warning that is not immediately obvious in any way, shape, or form. So thank you very much, Toke, for giving us that heads up. Hopefully people will hear that.
There you go. Lastly, Rob, not this Rob, different Rob, wanted to write back to say that after hearing our wireless gaming headset recommendations, which were to not buy one.
Well, I gave a couple that I thought were okay. Just overall, if you're looking at most companies that say this is a gaming headset, just avoid it, because for whatever reason, it
kind of like an 8K TV.
Sounds like poop as long as they put gaming in the marketing. But
yeah, they spend a lot more on the LED lights on them.
They sure do.
The sound quality.
Gotta have those RGB lights at the expense of going from a 5-cent driver to a 2-cent driver.
Anyways, he decided to take a chance, and he spent the extra money to get the Audeze Maxwell model with his planar magnetic drivers, priced at $300. That felt a little pricey at first, but wow. Thankfully, they sound amazing, and he's super happy with them.
Hooray!
Also, we found some aftermarket ear pads for them from wickedcushions.com, which definitely would. I don't think I would automatically click on that link. That's not the link that I'm going to click on if my wife is in the house.
Because you see the internet, wickedcushions.com, and you're like, yeah, those are definitely aftermarket headphone ear pads.
That's not the first place my mind went. I'm be honest with you. What else could it be?
Could that name be on the internet?
Throw pillows for your bed, maybe?
Nope.
I don't know. Maybe those pillows that you've seen them where they have if you wipe your hand down that one way, it changes the thing, but makes it in Wicked Cushions. You know, it's like you're a pitcher, and then you flick it the other way, then you're a devil or something. I don't know. Anyways, these aftermarket ear pads allow for more airflow and a bit less of the closed back sound. He's happy with those. And more importantly, they let him hear when his wife is calling him so she doesn't kill him while he's gaming. Good stuff. Well, yes, and you have to delete your browser history because of the Wicked Cushions thing. But other than that, it's fine.
Well, very happy to hear that. Yeah, those Maxwell headphones, I mean, yeah, they are excellent sound. I mean, they basically sound like Audeze's other planar magnetic headphones, so fantastic. They're glad they didn't downgrade it just so they could stick the gaming moniker on there. So there you go. Very glad that you're happy with them. $300, yeah, it's kind of pricey for headphones, but then when you're thinking like what we spend on our other audio equipment, it's not that bad when you compare it to that stuff. So there you go. As long as you're happy with it and it's satisfying you, where, you know, other gaming headsets definitely let them down. So there you go. You can justify it that way.
All right, let's get to these questions.
Yeah.
I actually need to get some more coffee too. Paul started having problems with the Onkyo receiver. It caught on fire.
Not quite, but
yeah. Dang it. That was such a good time for AVRant when the Onkyo receivers were constantly catching on fire. That was
relatively easy to poke fun at that. Yes,
it was. It's a very low-hanging fruit, and you know, since then we've really been waiting for some other AV receiver manufacturer to screw up just as badly, but no one has. It's very disappointing. Onkyo did have the stupid Accu EQ thing for a while, and that was a good punching bag.
I mean, it's still there.
Yeah, but they now have Dirac.
They have Dirac, so but it's still there. And unlike others, Dirac comes with the Onkyo receivers. You don't have to pay extra.
That's right.
It's already there, but it's not mandatory to use it or anything. You can still use Accu EQ if you want to.
Yeah, if you're like really into abuse, you're like, I'm sorry, I can't have things this nice. Anyways, he sent his Onkyo in for repair and was told it had a faulty DSP chip. It was out of warranty, so it was going to cost a significant amount to repair. They did offer to give him a 20% discount on a regular MSRP if he bought a new Onkyo receiver, but this was his second Onkyo receiver to go bad, so he decided to leave that brand and get a Denon instead. That one caught on fire, unfortunately.
No. Not yet, anyway. Still relatively new.
Give it time. I can hope. For his 9-speaker system, he went with the Denon X3800H, and he went ahead and paid the extra to get Dirac Live Full as well. All right, he made the mistake of looking up X3800 reviews after he bought it. Most are very positive, and he has already been enjoying it himself. He powers 6 of his speakers with the Denon and the front 3 speakers with an external amp. But Audio Science Review notes in their measurements of the DAC and preamp outputs that compared with this 3700H, there's a significant decrease in signal versus noise and distortion, or SINAD, S-I-N-A-D, signal versus noise, whatever.
Which is like the big singular number that everyone tends to focus on from Audio Science Reviews. I mean, look, the people who are really into it, that isn't the thing, but for the people who are a little bit more casual glancing at it, they have these graphs where they take all the things that they've reviewed and put them in a ordered graph from, you know, highest scoring SINAD to lowest scoring SINAD, and people just sort of look at that and are like, this one is in the red! Oh my goodness, it's in the red part of the graph now, and yeah.
Don't make the graph red. How about that?
I mean, yeah, it's very arbitrary what the colors are and at what point the colors
change.
Someone
made a decision to make that red. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's like when I'm watching the gymnastics and they have like the green, yellow, and red now to help the stupid people understand if they did well or not. Listen, the color that you would get if you tried to compete in this
would be off the charts.
Doesn't exist in like we cannot see it. That's how far back down it is.
Off the bottom end.
It's off the bottom. You'd have to give color back. Okay, you'd be negative color. So just because somebody decided to make it red doesn't make it bad. Anyways, significant decrease in SINAD. Signal versus noise and distortion, going from an excellent or green 97 dB on the 3700H when outputting a 2-volt signal to a mediocre 87 dB on the new X3800H.
That's right.
Which is, definitely something you're going to notice in your room. Like immediately.
Well, this is what's coming up. Question it.
A couple of years ago, when this X6700H also measured 87 dB SINAD, whatever, from its pre-outs, the Audio Science Review got in touch with Denon, and they said that it was lower than their own measurements and determined there was a production problem that they fixed thanks to Audio Science Review's efforts. Whatever. They also contacted Denon about the 3800H, but this time the response was that the 87 dB SINAD score was well within their expected tolerance, and that for the majority of external amplifiers they anticipate being connected to the 3800H, it's fine. Indeed, when the output voltage was lowered to just under 1 volt, the SINAD score increased to 95 dB, although that's still lower than what the 3700H measured at this 1 volt output level. Later in the review, the actual amplifier output measured in the 95 to 96 dB SINAD, 85 to 86 dB SINAD range, which was a touch lower than the 3700H, but still within the very good range.
Yeah, so this is pre-amplifier versus amplifier, right? So in the pre-amplifier stage, they were measuring 87, which they're like, yeah, that's kind of mediocre to poor for a pre-amplifier SINAD score. But for an actual amplifier score, getting over 80 dB on your SINAD for the actual amplifier is good. So this one's still scored good. A touch lower than the 3700H from a few years ago, but still very good on the actual amplifier output.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Later, I know I read that. So basically, Paul just wants to understand how concerned you should be. A lot of people are freaking out over that. Yeah, a lot of people who don't own this and will never own this.
Absolutely. They definitely won't now. Look at it. It's in the red. How could it possibly be owned?
So basically, Paul just wants to understand how concerned you should be. A lot of people are freaking out over the 2-volt preamp output scoring being 10 dB worse than the 3700H. But other people are saying that anything over 80 dB is inaudible, and some people even say anything over 60 dB is no problem. Can we explain what the real deal is? I mean, technically, I can't explain what the real deal here is, except that this would be the kind of thing, like whenever you talk about signal noise distortion and that sort of stuff, you're always talking about the absolute pinnacle of performance. When you start pushing it right to the edge of what something is capable of doing, that's when the distortion comes in. We talk a lot here about things that are audible versus inaudible, and sometimes we talk about like noise floor. I guess I'm hitting puberty finally. My voice is cracking, so maybe I got a growth spurt. God knows I need one. So. We'll say, just turn your receiver on, put it up to reference volume, and then go listen to your speakers and see if you hear something. Well, people put their ear right next to the speaker. I hear something. There's a ghost in there or something. Yeah, and they're like, oh my God, I got to get an external amp. I'm like, well, there's a big difference between that, which is kind of what we're talking about here, and actual, you can hear it from your seats. So in your case, you've already got this thing set up, right?
Yes.
You're already hearing. Are you hearing a problem? So
very clearly not. He's like, oh, this sounds great.
Yeah, everything sounds great to me. What, am I stupid? No, you're not stupid. There's a whole industry within every single hobby whose sole purpose it is to find ways to compare things to show that one thing's better than the other. And you can always find a way to compare something to show that one thing's better than the other. I've tested dozens and dozens of headphones, and most of them have active noise canceling. And there's like fine active noise canceling and bad active noise canceling. And the differences are not subtle. You put on the bad one, you're like, it sounds about the same. Put on the good one, you're like, hey, look at noise is reduced. That's pretty much it. But yet there's still review after review after review of, this is the best noise canceling I've ever heard. I'm like, first of all, how do you hear noise canceling?
Well, you hear
by definition, you're not hearing it. And whatever. So Rob's going to tell you, while I get coffee, Rob's going to tell you why this signal noise thing is bupkis.
So I'll break this down a little bit. I want to credit Gene Delasalo over at Audioholics. He actually made a bit of a response to this because he was getting a lot of questions about SINAD and these figures that are measured in decibels and given these rankings and that. And he's like, okay, how much should we be worried about this? So here's the thing. SINAD is one method of measuring signal versus noise and distortion. So we've been doing that before as total harmonic distortion plus noise. It's just that is always referenced as a percentage, right? It's the percentage of, so you take the original signal, and then what percentage of that signal is harmonic distortion and noise, and it's listed as a percentage instead of being listed as a decibel, but you can convert between the two. Now, this chart that Gene created, it's, this is a little bit imprecise, but it's pretty darn accurate in terms of just converting between the two things. And we'll see over here, if you're saying, okay, something has 0.1 total harmonic distortion plus noise, which is a very common metric that would be used for an actual amplifier, right? We'll often see this amplifier outputs 200 watts into an 8 ohm load, full power, given 0.1% total harmonic distortion plus noise. That's pretty common. Well, that would equate to a 60 decibels SINAD, which is why you might have seen that reference to, anything better than 60 is going to be inaudible because that's 0.1% total harmonic distortion plus noise. And out of an amplifier, that's pretty much the typical metric that you'll see. Sometimes they'll do it as 0.05% or something like that, which of course would be, I don't know, somewhere in the 65 to 70 dB range on SINAD or something like that. But that's pretty common for an amplifier to see a figure like that. Now, on a pre-amplifier stage, we are typically looking for that to be an order of magnitude better than the amplifier. So that's what we're looking for. A lot of preamplifiers, they'll say at full preamplifier output, it'll be 0.01% total harmonic distortion plus noise, which equates to 80 decibels on that SINAD scale. So when people were saying, hey, anything better than 80, and it scored, what was it, 86, 87, or whatever it was?
87.
Yeah, and that was with the 2-volt signal, which is enough voltage to drive almost any amplifier to full power. There are some amplifiers that require greater than 2 volts of output to get to full rated power, but most need 2 volts to get to full rated power. Some don't even need 2 volts. They need less than that. But that's a pretty common standard, is that 2 volts. So yeah, that means that it was doing better than 0.01% total harmonic distortion plus noise at the 2-volt signal. And when it went down to 1 volt, it was, getting up closer to, 90 something, right? 95 decibels in the SINAD score. So, I mean, it's almost getting to the 0.001 total harmonic, 0.005 or something in that range, right? So the people who are saying this really isn't something to worry about are correct. They're absolutely correct because, we're used to seeing that 0.01% total harmonic distortion plus noise as being the spec on a pre-out, and it's exceeding that. And then they're saying, like a lot, if you're powering the rest of your system with built-in amplifiers from the 3800H, you're probably not connecting 500-watt amplifiers for the other one and using it as the preamplifier for that, where maybe you'd need more than 2 volts of signal to get the full 500-watt output. Like if you're using a 100-watt per channel external amplifier, it probably needs maybe 1.2 volts. That's pretty common for 100-watt amplifiers. They'll need 1.2 volts to get to their full rated power. And at that point, you're like at 90 dB SINAD or something in that range. It's going to be around there. You're going to be better than 0.01% total harmonic distortion plus noise. So, to put your mind at ease, I think Denon is absolutely correct that, like, for what they would ever expect someone to connect as an external amp to an X3800H, they're totally fine. Even outside of that, it's better than 0.01% total harmonic distortion plus noise coming out of that pre-out. So is it objectively not as quiet as the 3700H? I mean, what it means is the 3700H, for whatever reason in that model year, like, outperformed anything that you could reasonably expect or ever need, right? It was like an order of magnitude better than it could possibly need to be. And they're like, well, that's great. Objectively, sure, that's fantastic, wonderful. Less noise is less noise. But do we actually need to worry about it? I mean, A, you answered your own question because you've been listening to it and it's fine. And, B, no, you don't need, objectively, you don't need to worry about it. It's well within any sort of tolerance or spec that you could ever hope or need. The other thing I wanted to point out is, yes, there is a relationship between the preamplifier output and the actual amplified output at the end of all things, right? If you had worse preamplification, noise, and distortion to begin with, then that is just going to get amplified by the amplifier, and you're going to end up with worse there. Well, it's kind of interesting that at rated power, the amplified SINAD that was measured for the 3800H was like almost the same as the preamplifier, which means like they got some clean amplifiers in there, or it was a really good match between the preamplification section and the amplified section. It was a really good match there. They ended up with really good results for the actual amplified output in terms of harmonic distortion and noise. So it's like, oh, almost as though they engineered it quite well, where the preamplifier section was as quiet as it needed to be. The amplifier section is pretty much always going to be the bottleneck on that, and it came out with a really clean result. So you have objectively nothing to worry about.
So I wrote an article a while back called something like, I think my system sounds great, should I return it?
Yeah.
The idea here is that we get a lot of this sort of thing. I bought something, I get it home, I set it up, I love it. I go online for whatever reason, because I guess I love to have my feelings hurt. And then I search for it, and then somebody hates it. Somebody says it's terrible. And now you're like questioning whether, like, I think it sounds good. And, you know, the fact of the matter, and there are a lot of points I have in there. The real question you have to ask yourself is, if you think it sounds good, if you think what you have sounds good, if you think you researched correctly and you brought home something and it sounds good, and then you go online and somebody says, well, you know, it doesn't measure so good in this, or that's the horn-loaded speakers or that, or something like that, right? If you returned it and got something else, would it sound significantly better for the same amount of money? And the reality
if you were primed by them telling you that it would, then you might believe that it does. You
might believe it, but in the end, you will always, no matter how hard you cognitively dissonance yourself into believing something, it is a matter of time before you go, this really doesn't sound that, this really doesn't sound that much better.
But I mean, here's the basic thing. You know, that scary looking graph where now the 3800H is falling into the red territory. Everything that scored above 80 there should be colored green. That's really what, you know, and if it were, would it freak you out? I mean, look, the 3800H would still appear in that preamplifier section lower down than the 3700H, but if they were all colored green, would you care? And really, that's what it should be. Everything above 80 should be green.
Yeah. So a lot of times, like when I'm researching a product to buy, I worry about the same sort of things that we're talking about right here. Like I look at all these things, I'm like, if I'm going to buy something, I want to make sure I buy something that's, you know, got the best possible specs. And then I do my research as best I can, because there's only so much you can really understand about these things. And I decide, okay, well, this is not a spec I really need, that I'm not going to put as much into worrying about this one thing as these other people seem to care about. You know, like when I look at bikes, you know, weight is a important metric, but it's not like such an important metric that if it's like 0.1 pound difference, then that bike gets out, you know, the other, you know what I mean? There's other factors
and that
play
that was
into
Gene's
it.
point in that is like, yeah, there is so much emphasis put on that one number. It's like, no, you got to look at the whole thing, not just one number. So breaking it down to one number is always an issue. We got to go faster because we got tons of questions.
Whatever, I don't care. All right. So he says he shouldn't have anything to worry about using Denon's built-in amps to power his surround and overhead speakers. Should he? No. Oh, there you go.
I mean, almost certainly no. I mean, there's a little bit of how far away are you sitting? Because if you're really, really far away, then there's a chance. But you can pretty much answer, if they're getting loud enough already, then the answer is no. And as we mentioned, objectively, even according to Audio Science Review, the actual built-in amplifiers measure really, really well. So in almost all likelihood, there's no chance that you have to worry about your surrounds and overheads being powered by the built-in amps.
He's happy with the results he got using Dirac. He thinks it's a noticeable improvement over Onkyo Accu EQ. Well, that's setting the bar low.
It is setting it low.
The rumor is that Denon will add Dirac Live Bass Management sometime in 2024. It will cost extra. Lots of people seem to think that Dirac Live Bass Management is a significant improvement if you use 2 or more subs, but he'd like to better understand if it will be worth the price. Can we explain to him how it works? And with his dual subwoofer setup, would it be worthwhile? I can't remember how it works, and I don't really think I care. I think that it's going to be the same, but go on.
Well, so I mean, Dirac Live Bass Management is Dirac's implementation of the multi-sub optimizer. So what this is doing is it is individually measuring each base producing thing. And this is a little bit important because they are measuring, let's say you have 2 subwoofers, it's measuring each subwoofer individually, and then it is also measuring the combined output of your front, left, and right speakers. Even if they're set to small, it's still measuring the combined output, base output of those as well. And what it's doing there is using some, fairly sophisticated math and algorithms to calculate, okay, if we have these 3 or 4 or 5 base producing elements, and these are the measured results that we got across multiple microphone locations, then what combination of individual volume levels for those 3 things, and of course the speakers are going to be kind of fixed in their volume level, but what combination of individual volume levels, individual phase, and individual EQ is going to result in not just the most linear or closest to whatever target you've drawn, not just that response, but the most uniform response. What combination do we do? So this is a calculated method versus a, just pure brute strength trial and error method, right, which is what you would have to do if you were doing it manually, or something like JBL Synthesis Arcos, where they simultaneously measure in 16 or more microphone positions and just sort of brute force trial and error, adjusting those things in an automated sequence until you get the most uniform results and then equalize from there. This is a mathematically calculated version of doing that, and it's quite effective. Now, it's most effective if you use more than 2 subwoofers, if you use at least 3 or 4 subwoofers. But where it can still have benefit is because they are also taking into account the bass output of your front, left, and right speakers as a combo, and using that as like your third quote-unquote sub, even though it might be frequency response limited, it's still going to have contribution, somewhat below the crossover frequency. So it's calculating that as a 3 bass producing thing system if you have 2 subwoofers, or as a 4 if you have 3 subwoofers, or as a 5 if you have 4 subwoofers. So basically, is this well worth it? Well, what's your room like? Because if you have 2 subwoofers in a rectangular room and you're able to position those 2 subwoofers across the room from each other, then what Dirac Live Bass Management is going to add to that and enhance to that is minimal. You're already reaping the benefits of having a mathematically predictable room if it's an enclosed rectangle, and you've already benefited yourself by positioning your subwoofer as well. You're already going to have very good uniformity, at which point Dirac Live Bass Management is pretty much hands-off. It might do a few little adjustments, but it's going to be minimal. Where it's the most benefit is if you have an irregularly shaped room, right, it's got openings, you're very limited on where your subwoofers can be placed, so they're not optimally placed. It can have a considerably larger impact there. You can get similar results with a little bit more trial and error and time on your own part using Multi-Sub Optimizer, which is a free version of this. But, that means you have to, purchase your own measurement equipment and be a little bit more hands-on with it. So there's definitely a time where I'm going to say, yeah, this could have a benefit for you. But it sounds like the theory you've set up is pretty dedicated. So I'm going to put it to you. If your room is already pretty close to an enclosed rectangle, if you've already optimally placed your 2 subwoofers, I would say it's probably not really worth the money. It's not going to make much of a difference in that situation. But if you have a very suboptimal room setup, then it could make quite a beneficial difference.
So, yeah, don't do it. Ryan is feeling like he's about to pull his hair out and chuck his Marantz Slimline NR 1711 out the window. It was a refurbished unit that he bought from Accessories for Less over 2 years ago. He wrote us about it several months ago when it started randomly entering the Audeze setup mode. We said there must be a problem with the Audeze microphone input and suggested it might just need a thorough cleaning since something must be creating an electrical contact so the receiver thinks the setup mic has been plugged in. Yeah. Well, he's cleaned the input, the mic port thoroughly. He's tried plugging in and unplugging the Audeze setup mic. He even tried unplugging absolutely everything from the back of the receiver and just leaving it powered on with nothing attached. He's made sure it's fully updated on its firmware and done a full factory reset. Sometimes it sits there for hours just fine and you get through a whole movie, but other times it wigs out and randomly enters Audeze setup mode 5 or 6 times within a couple of minutes. Worse yet, it sometimes makes a very loud pop from his speakers, so things cannot go on like this. The problem is he's got a very busy schedule, and he isn't able to sit on hold to wait for a phone call with Marantz customer support or take the time to type back and forth on a live chat. He's tried sending an official support ticket to Marantz's website, but has never received a response. So he's wondering if we have any ideas how he can get some support and hopefully get it repaired. He only paid $600 for it. So he's willing to pay a reasonable amount for a repair, but it isn't even worth the time and effort. What do we think? I think it's broken.
I mean, there's clearly a short circuit going on in that Audeze setup mic port. Now, if that is all it is, if it's right in that port or it's just the wire that connects it to the board or whatever, like I wouldn't expect that to be a super expensive repair. But on the other hand, maybe there's something wrong on the circuit board itself and they'd have to replace the whole circuit board and that would probably cost more than it's worth. We don't know. We obviously don't know at this point. Now, I'm a little surprised that the support never got back to you because I have contacted, in my case, Denon customer support, and they got back to me within a couple of days. So I'm a little bit surprised at that. I mean, I would try again if you've only tried once. I would also maybe try going through Denon's because it is the same company.
Sure,
I don't know if they're going to the same place ultimately, but who knows? I wouldn't hesitate to do that. I would also try contacting Accessories for Less. You bought it from them. They have a very strong relationship with Denon and Marantz, so they might be able to forward you to someone who could get your response. I mean, the other thing to do, if you're willing to, is try going through social media. Try going through Facebook or X or Instagram or whatever, because Marantz is there, and quite often the social media manager will respond much more quickly than the official customer support, so that might be worth it. And then Marantz does on their website, they have a whole list of their officially authorized service centers, and they have the phone numbers for them directly. So given that, this might be an out of warranty repair anyway, just look up whichever service center is closest to your physical location and call them directly. That might be the way to get the fastest response on this. So those would be the things I would try if you're willing to do the time. I'm really sorry that they didn't get back to you on the official ticket. That's, like I say, a little bit feels.
If you have a repair shop in town too, you could take it into them and just whatever. I mean, so I don't remember what we told you to do. I know that I remember talking about this.
Yeah. We definitely suggested cleaning it because it sounded like
taking off the top.
Maybe a teeny tiny little spider got in there and it put its web inside of that microphone port.
But there's, like Rob said, at this point, I'm starting to believe it's something internal, which means, like you said, what you're going to be paying for, other than the expertise and the ability to fix it, is how long it's going to take to diagnose it and find the actual problem, which could take a million years or it could take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's going to be somewhere between those two things. So you need to, unfortunately. Are you really boiling water in here right now? Is that what you're doing? What part of this microphone being on made you think that was going to be okay?
There's things going on in the background, folks. You can't see it on YouTube.
Do something quieter. Boil water. What is wrong? You're not supposed to be here. Anyways, so taking it into a local support place is not totally, and honestly, I agree with Rob. Try to contact them again as far as the support goes. Yeah. But then if that doesn't work, local shop, just give them sort of the lowdown, because it seems like it happens. Like you don't have to have anything plugged into it for it to happen.
Oh, that's a short circuit going on. It's definitely.
So they're definitely going to be able to see it, and then see what they say as far as what they think it's going to cost. Yeah. And then go from there. And
given what he said,
$600, I mean, you got your money's worth.
If all of those things are really just like, look, I get that might work, but it's just not like, I just don't have the time to deal with any of that. I mean, at that point, you've sort of answered your own question where you're like, I think you're just buying a new receiver at that point, because there is a cost benefit ratio going on here, what your time is worth.
Yes.
So, I mean, honestly, I think the best chance is probably social media, because if they don't respond to you fairly quickly, they're just not going to. So that's probably the easiest and fastest one to try.
Yeah. Yes. I agree with that. Dave has a 77-inch LG B2 OLED. Unlike the C2 and G2 models, it only two of its 4 HDMI inputs are HDMI 2.1. The other two inputs are HDMI 2.0. He's got all the newest gaming systems and a gaming PC with an NVIDIA RTX graphics card. Plus, he has several legacy gaming systems, so he's in need of more HDMI ports. Which external HDMI switch do we recommend? I don't know.
All right. I'm going to suggest the one from the brand Orei. That's O-R-E-I. They have their BK401. And yes, 401 means 4 inputs and 1 output, not surprisingly. And they are HDMI 2.1. I do know that this one works, at least, functionally it works pretty well. It comes with a very simple, tiny little remote control. The image in the picture is much, much, much larger than it would actually be in your hand. That's either a tiny, tiny hand or a completely inaccurate representation of the remote size, because it's teeny tiny. But 4 inputs on the back. One thing I'm not crazy about is the HDMI output is actually on the side, so it kind of makes the cable management a little bit awkward in some situations. But given that it's $60 and it works, that's the one I'm going to recommend. So you can plug certainly your Xbox Series X and your PlayStation 5 into that and get good results. I will say it does not seem to handle 4K 120 12-bit signals properly, which means these are almost certainly 40 gigabit per second HDMI 2.1 ports rather than the full 48 gigabit per second, which is completely understandable. That's very common. Most HDMI 2.1 ports are 40 gigabits per second, not 48. So specifically for your gaming PC, if you're using that to output 4K 120 at 12-bit, you'd want to plug your gaming PC directly into one of your B2's HDMI 2.1 ports, but you can definitely use this Orei 4-in, 1-out, $60 HDMI 2.1 switch to handle your Xbox Series X, which never goes above 40 gigabits per second, and your PS5, which never goes above, I think it's 36 or 32 or something like. It's below 40 anyway. And of course, it'll work for your other HDMI 2.0 systems that you might plug into it too. So given that it's $60, there are other HDMI 2.1 switchers out there that are even cheaper from Chinese brands. I have absolutely no idea who they are. I won't say whether they work great or don't work. I have no idea, but I don't think this Orei one for like $15 more is so much more expensive that you need to avoid it and take a chance on one I have no idea about. So there you go. That's the one I'll recommend.
Yeah, I think Mono Price has got like their Blackbird series, which I know.
Yeah, but
does.
HDMI 2.1 is still kind of questionable over there. So
yeah, it says it's 2.1 on here. Whatever. Check it out. Kris, we've talked about how the lamp in the projector gradually dims over time, and as long as you weren't maxing out its light output right from the beginning, you can make adjustments to compensate. Well, he's got a JVC projector. He'd like to know what those adjustments are. Does he just need to tweak the brightness and contrast settings? If so, what's a good, easy-to-understand calibration disc to use for this purpose? I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but for a long time, we used to recommend using the THX DVDs.
Well, probably not that anymore.
Not anymore, but...
and there was Digital Video Essentials, which has gone by the wayside. Yes. It's going to be a little bit tough to track those discs down now. So just for the discs, since we're already talking about them, I mean, the standard right now is Spears and Munsel's UHD benchmark disc. They actually just had a new updated version for 2023. It's $60, which is really quite affordable, honestly, for how much they give you. It's 3 different discs, ultra high definition discs at that. So if you aren't using an ultra high definition player, you would kind of want to avoid it. And I've got an alternative that's a little less expensive if you just have a Blu-ray. But yeah, for $60, Spears and Munsel's UHD benchmark, it is the standard bearer. However, I wouldn't necessarily say it's easy to use. They have actually made it a bit easier to use than this is now the 3rd edition. It's easier to use than the 2nd edition. But they have instructions on their website. But there's so many test patterns that it is definitely overwhelming if you don't already know what you're doing, and you really don't need this much just to do very basic picture settings changes, but just to mention that is the standard bearer at this point. So Disney's WoW World of Wonder Blu-ray, and it is a Blu-ray, not an ultra high definition Blu-ray, so it's 1080p in standard definition. It goes for $35 over at Amazon, and it is very easy to use because I mean it's from Disney. It's for people who have no technical knowledge at all, so it absolutely talks you through the process and is very easy to use. So that is an alternative if that's all you need. But adjusting the contrast and brightness isn't really usually the thing that we're doing on a projector. On the JVCs, most of them, until the very newest ones with the laser light engines, most of the previous ones had adjustable irises. And that would be the primary way that you would gradually let a little bit more light out, because very often when you were starting off, you would manually close down that iris a little bit. Quite a few of them actually had two irises. They had a fixed iris that you would set to a certain level, and then a variable iris that would automatically adjust itself based on the content that you're watching, kind of like global dimming on a television, except it was an iris-based system. But there was that manual iris that you could fix to a certain position. So very often you would close that down a little bit at the beginning because the lamp actually had more light output than you needed. And then as it gradually dims little by little, you could just open up that iris a little bit. And that's the primary way that we do it. You could, of course, transition from, low lamp mode to mid lamp mode to high lamp mode as things get very noticeably dimmer. But of course, that'll increase your fan noise as you do that as well. So barring those changes, then yes, you might go into the contrast and brightness settings, particularly the contrast setting, because that's the white point, that's the bright part of the image. So increasing that is the most likely thing. You don't really need a disc to do that. You could, in fact, for this purpose, for what you're talking about, just boosting the light out a little bit so that you're not clipping highlights, but you're seeing all of the highlight detail. You could use a pluge pattern, it says P-L-U-G-E, a pluge pattern off of YouTube. It would work absolutely fine. Or you could just download the pattern from AVS Forum. They have their AVS HD patterns that you can just download the pattern as a JPEG and put it on a USB stick and play that. That's totally fine for setting this, and that's really all you need.
All right. Get your pluge on.
Yeah.
Kiran from India. Kiran has looked through all the impressions he could find from people who heard Trinnov's demo at CDF for their new waveforming multi-subwoofer setup using a version of double bass array. 24 subs, 12 at the front and 12 at the back were used in the CDF demo, which is ludicrous, but whatever.
It's a lot of subs.
Kiran has some questions about it now, and he'd like our thoughts. So everybody says it was the tightest and cleanest bass they've ever heard. A deep bass note or sudden explosion plays and then instantly disappears. But given that they constructed a perfectly rectangular room, how different would it have been if they had used 4 or even 2 good subwoofers? First of all, I have been on the floor of Cedia many times. I have been in demo rooms that are set up on the floor of Cedia many times. Let me tell you something about those demo rooms. They suck.
I mean, people said, despite this having been constructed there, it was definitely not soundproof.
Oh God, the noise floor in those places are nuts. Even though they do their best, and the walls are all whatever.
No,
they do their best.
It
is a not quiet environment.
Yes.
So to sit there and to draw any conclusions about anything,
right,
especially if something as tight or clean, meaning that it starts and stops and there's no holdover anywhere.
That's right.
How could you tell?
Indeed.
How could you tell?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't take in this demo, but I do know a little bit, a modicum about double bass array. Now, look, the physics behind a double bass array is completely valid. It absolutely does work best in a completely rectangular room. The secret sauce of Trinnov's version of this waveforming, their version of the double bass array, is that thanks to their very sophisticated measurement system, this is supposedly going to be possible in non-perfectly rectangular rooms, where they're going to be making individual adjustments to those multiple subwoofers to get the same wave front pattern, this essentially cylindrical wave front pattern emanating from the front of the room to the back of the room, where it gets then canceled out, not obliterated because waves pass through each other, but through the calculations, the wave coming from the back of the room to the front of the room nicely cancels out any of the reflections that the wave from the front of the room to the back of the room will also be generating. So the physics behind it is solid. Trinnov's calculations, I'm fairly confident that they are absolutely capable of doing that. But yes, I have to say, as far as judging it based on the Cedia floor demo, I suspect if you had 4, 2 of the mid of the side walls, 2 of the mid of the front walls, completely adequate in terms of output, playing that you would have thought that was super clean, tight bass too, because any of the much quieter residual rumbles in that are completely masked by the noise of the show floor. And I think you would have been equally blown away. Now, that's speculation on my part, but I do suspect, just as you do, that the difference would not have really been that great in that demo. I'm not saying that the measured results in real life in a well-controlled, nice, quiet room, I'm sure there will be objective differences, because there are objective differences between just a standard double bass array and a 4 subwoofer setup. It is measurable. The difference is there in terms of, just the RT60 time, or in fact, like the RT100 time, which is drastically faster in a double bass array. But yeah, I think on the show floor, you would have been equally as impressed.
Some people said that the complete and utter lack of any rumble from the room made familiar scenes with deep bass seem less impactful than they were used to or expecting. The bass came and went so quickly that they were left wanting more, and it didn't actually sound or feel like a big movie theater or an IMAX presentation. Measurement-wise, it's basically like playing bass in an anechoic chamber. It was way, way cleaner, but do we actually want that? Is this more about marketing and innovation for innovation's sake? That room is for all intents and purposes for the way the subwoofers, the bass affects it. It doesn't. The walls aren't really solid. You know what I mean? Okay. They're not, drywall and 2x4s. Well, it's just,
it was a pretty well built room that they constructed in there.
Came and went. This is like people who are like, I have my garage speakers and I've never been able to get speakers that sound as good. Whatever.
A lot of the people who were reporting on it, they were very much primed before the demo was done. They talked about all the benefits of this, and they were very much primed for here's what you're listening for, and you're never going to have experienced bass this clean and tight, and never going to have it disappear. But the people who were criticizing and saying, okay, it actually, like, I've watched this scene a gazillion times at home. I'm used to it rumbling more than it does in this room. I believe them, because a lot of people's setups are definitely rumbling.
Terrible.
And there's a whole bunch going on there. But just like, to be completely honest and fair about all this, like, there are precisely no movies being mastered in a dubbing stage that uses this type of bass system. Many of them are like multiple subwoofer, but single channel, not set up for uniformity in the room type systems in the actual dubbing stage, and they're just relying on the sheer size of the room that, positioning and multiple subwoofers aren't really necessary to still have decent uniformity, or at least pretty good linearity at the dubbing seat in the optimal position inside of that room. But like, nothing is being mastered this way. So I actually have a little bit of contention of, okay, like, we can't argue how objectively accurate to the signal it is, right? The signal said play exactly this note for exactly this long, and like, yeah, the double bass array properly set up, that's what it does. But in a sense, it's like, when it was being mastered, okay, that's the signal they ended up with, but they were hearing it a certain way in the dubbing stage using a bass producing system that was not this. That was not actually this clean. So in a way, they were mastering it based on a system that was producing a bit more resonance and reverberation in the room than this would have. So if all dubbing stages are updated to use this system, okay, maybe that's going to be the optimal way to play it back. But I actually think there's an argument to say that that's not the way that the mastering engineer heard it when they made the soundtrack. Maybe they were counting on a little bit more room rumble and a little bit more resonance to get the effect that they wanted. That's how they mastered it. So I think there's an argument there.
You can make the argument. I think that it's not even an academic argument, because first of all, nobody's buying this thing. In all reality,
nobody in our price range.
Nobody.
Tom's and mine.
Well, not even that. I just don't think that it's. I think that if you're a custom installer in a very large market, very large market like Los Angeles, New York, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if you install 6 total of these systems if they ever become available.
Who knows?
For everybody.
Not the full 24. That's going to be a stretch.
So, to me, it becomes not even an academic argument, because in a actual house, like actual room, where things are going to shake and everything else.
Well, and I mean, if you're putting it in the suboptimal room where it's a room that already existed, you're not doing this.
Yeah.
This is only going to go in bespoke rooms that are going to be perfectly rectangular. So yeah, the whole argument is I think it's a little bit dubious that this is truly useful.
Yeah. And again, anyone who goes away from a CEDIA or CES demo room experience and draws conclusions about how something sounds based on their experience there is being disingenuous at best, because you can't do it. You can't do it. Full stop. Even if I walked out of CEDIA into my own home and tried to do a review, I would say that was not a good idea, because I'm exhausted, I'm sore, I'm sleep deprived, I have a whole bunch of other things going on that would have tainted or affected my observations of what it was I was reviewing. But on top of that, you're now in a different room in a different place, and God knows what you're actually hearing. So some people have mentioned that with this system, physical bass traps are no longer required, but if someone is in the price range to get a Trinnov processor and more than 4 subwoofers, is that really anything? Surely installing all those subs takes up just as much physical space as adequate bass trappings would have, and the budget wouldn't be a concern, so is it really even a benefit? Well, I would not. First of all, it's like saying that, oh, we don't need bass trapping because we got perfect bass. Does not. It ignores the fact that there are other bass creating objects in your room that aren't subwoofers. So,
well, it's the transition. At some point, you're still crossing over to your speakers, and your speakers are playing down to some frequency. I mean, honestly, this might allow you to raise the crossover frequency, which is probably not even what anybody had in mind. But the passive bass trapping that we do, our quarter bass traps made out of insulation and stuff like that, that is really about the crossover region. It's not about the deep bass. We've always needed multiple subwoofers to treat the deep bass, because passive room treatments just can't go that low. So I would actually contend that wherever your crossover ends up being, you still need treatments there, because the subwoofers themselves, the part that they're producing at and below the crossover frequency, that's going to be ridiculously clean, but there's still going to be a transition from the speakers to those subwoofers, and you're still going to want passive room treatments for the speaker side of things. So yeah, I would say no, that isn't the case. There's still going to be a crossover somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just ludicrous to think that you're going to get rid of
Dirac's ART system, their active room treatment system, that's the one where you could get away without passive bass traps, because that is addressing all of the bass producing things, not just the subwoofers. It's all about that crossover between the speakers and subwoofers. It's addressing all of it as an active room treatment system. So Dirac's ART is the one where you would get away with it, not so much the Trinnov waveforming.
So the I want giant subwoofers as many as I can get crowd seemed to love it, of course. And he can only imagine that subwoofer manufacturers and custom installers are all for it, but it's making him skeptical. It's like, okay, we somehow convince people they need 15 or more speakers and 4 subwoofers. How do we get them to buy even more? Is that all this is? I mean, this is to me, this is more of an academic exercise.
I agree. Yeah.
How can, if we do this, what will it sound like? How can we, it cost me no object sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's no call for it. And that crowd that I want giant subwoofers in as many as I can get, that crowd that you're talking about, first of all, in my mind, and this might not be true, they are young. They don't have very many subwoofers, and their experience of bass is in a car where the more drivers, the better.
I don't think they'd even like this. I think it's too clean.
Well, on top of that, it's not what they're actually going for, and it's only a matter of time before those quote-unquote bass heads get a bunch of big subwoofers into their, or maybe one very big subwoofer into their home theater, and they go, this doesn't sound good. I don't understand why this doesn't sound good. It's a very big subwoofer. It's got, or maybe it's 3 or 4 big subwoofers and it doesn't sound good. Why doesn't it sound good? And they realize that there's more to it than just raw output. Yeah. And they're going to eventually turn away from that mode of thinking and come towards our side.
But I agree. I mean, I value it as an academic exercise. Sure. It's like if we want to play back what the signal said to do with like no effects from the room, no overhang, like if we want exactly what the electrical signal sent to do and we want to translate that as accurately as we possibly can into physical air movement, like this is a way to do it, and I appreciate that someone did it.
Okay. Sorry. Tyler's been working away on his home theater, and he's getting pretty close to completing it. He'd really like to have it all done in time for winter. Well, there's no winter here, so it's never going to be done. He's blacked out the room, including fully covering the windows. In the middle of his front wall, he's got 3 monolith THX speakers and his 2 front subs all arranged at the front of his room. Now he needs to get his acoustically transparent screen into position. I don't understand why you have 2 subs at the front of your room, but let's keep going.
Oh, maybe he has 2 more at the back.
I hope so.
Nothing wrong with that.
It's a silver ticket screen, so Tom is familiar with their method of wall mounting. Yes, I mean I am, but I don't.
I just want to know: does it have the connection points at the top and bottom, or is it the one you only hang at the top?
Top and bottom.
Top and bottom. Okay, there you go.
Tyler had originally envisioned constructing a full false wall at the front of his room, but with the flooring, ceiling, and painting all incomplete, he isn't so keen on doing that now. It also seems like a lot of work at this point, and he's looking for the laziest solution possible. Don't get lazy, my man. You put all this work in. Don't get lazy. He found one idea on the forum. The person had a similar front wall situation with a window right in the middle. They used some shelving brackets and a couple of 2x4s to make the top and bottom rails to attach the screen a good distance in front of the front wall. Do we think that would work well in this situation? It would be less work than making a whole false wall, wouldn't it? I mean, yeah, it would be. The screen isn't that heavy, so these brackets are well overkill for because in order to get it out far, you would have to the brackets themselves will hold a lot of weight. So there'll be more than enough for what you need. I mean, I'd still build the false wall, but that would just be me.
So I mean, how much work is it to put up the false wall? Honestly, the false wall could be friction fit. Theoretically, you could put a rubber gasket on the top and bottom so that isn't marring your floor. And I mean, it would mark your ceiling a bit, especially a black ceiling. You're not going to go away from that being marked no matter what you do. But I mean, minimally so. So you could rubber gasket it because, I mean, like Tom says, if really all you're holding is some fabric, because that's the false wall part of it, right? Some acoustically transparent fabric that's visually hiding your speakers and the screen, which doesn't weigh that much. So this doesn't have to be any sort of like structurally strong false wall. It can just be some very basic 2x4 framing that's friction fit into place. You stretch some fabric over it and hang your screen. I don't really think, honestly, genuinely, I don't really think that's much more work than installing the brackets. The brackets are going to leave more of a mark on your nicely painted black front wall than a friction fit frame would. So I'm kind of more in favor of just making a friction fit frame, just put a rubber gasket on the top and bottom, and I would do it that way.
Whatever. It'll work the way you want to do it too.
Yeah.
Jim, okay, one more time, and hopefully this will all make sense and click for him on this whole physically rotating one subwoofer versus another, and how that alters the phase relationship between them subject that we talked about last week.
Yep.
It just isn't making sense to him when we say that physically facing one subwoofer forward and the other subwoofer backwards is effectively the same as having both subs facing forward, but flipping the 180-degree polarity switch on one of them. I mean, I don't know, dude, how to explain it any better than we did last week.
Well, it's one specific thing that I can see where he's coming from.
If that were true, then we'd be saying that subwoofers with dual opposed drivers, like the SVS 3000 Micro, for example, have their 2 drivers, which are facing opposite directions, 180 degrees out of phase with each other. That is true.
Well, yeah, I can see where he's coming from. Yeah, we're using the word phase in 2 different contexts. So that's the confusion. It's the same word. It is phase, but it's in 2 different contexts.
So that doesn't make any sense at all. The 2 opposing, opposite-facing drivers are in phase. So they'd be facing separate. They'd be facing 2 separate subwoofers in opposite directions. They'd be the same thing. They'd be in phase, not 100 degrees out of phase, right? And how and why are we saying the opposite?
Yeah. So what we're talking about is signal phase. They are signally in phase. Right? No matter which direction the drivers are facing, they are both pushing out at the same time. They are both pulling in at the same time. So electrically, signal-wise, yes, they are in phase. But in terms of their contact with the air, like which direction are those drivers pushing or pulling the air at any given moment.
Right.
If you have two front-facing drivers and they're electrically in phase and they're both facing forward, then both of them are pushing the air forward at the same time and pulling the air back at the same time. If you physically rotate one of them 180 degrees, so they're one's facing forward, one's facing back, now one of those subs, they're still electrically and signally in phase, but now one of them is pushing the air forward, the other one is pushing the air back, and then the front one is sucking the air back and the other one is sucking the air forward at the very same time. So they are electrically and signally in phase, but they are acoustically out of phase. So then when we say you've got two front-facing subwoofers, they're both facing forward, but we flip the polarity switch on one of them, now we have the same situation where one driver is pushing the air forward, the other one is sucking it back, then they flip, the other one pushes it forward, the other one sucks it back. Now they are electrically and signally out of phase. They are responding to the signal in opposite directions, and they are acoustically out of phase as well. You could then take the one that had its 180 polarity switch flipped, physically rotate it 180 degrees, and now they're signally out of phase, but they are acoustically in phase because now they're both moving the air in the same direction. So it is that word phase, but in two different contexts, and that's the confusion.
Okay. I hope that helps. Yeah. But there's still a wrinkle in his mind about bass being omnidirectional and having two subwoofer drivers firing in different directions. We've often said how putting two subwoofers both at the front of the room is essentially the same as using a single sub because the wavelengths of deep bass frequencies are so long that physical separation between the two subs at the front of the room isn't enough to acoustically separate them. Mm-hmm. So if that's true, then how could the direction that one sub is facing versus the other make any possible difference? That wouldn't alter the physical separation of the two subs very much at all. So how could they be anything other than essentially just one subwoofer still? I mean, I think I started this whole thing saying you can play with it. Most of the time, it's not going to make that much of a difference from what you hear anyways. And now you're saying, yeah, but aren't they basically the same anyways, and therefore it doesn't make that much of a difference? Welcome to the beginning of this conversation, because that's where I started. I started with, we are talking about an academic point to this whole thing.
But there's another, I mean, there's a somewhat linguistically similar thing of this being a context issue. Because it's that term omnidirectional that's throwing him a bit, I believe anyway, given based on the question. I think that's what's throwing here, because we aren't very good, actually, when we're talking about bass being omnidirectional, about being precise enough about what we actually mean. Because if we're talking about if you could see the propagation of the wave out in the air, it is still directional. There's a direction that the air molecules are moving at any time. It's not that the air molecules are literally going in every direction simultaneously. Yeah. That would be omnidirectional air movement. Or that when the wave is being produced, like right at the subwoofer driver, that it is literally sending out a sphere of sound. It isn't. It's a hemisphere of sound that's coming out, and that hemisphere is oscillating backwards and forwards with the movement of the driver. So it isn't literal omnidirectional propagation of the wave out into the air. There is a direction that the air is moving at any given time. What is omnidirectional is our perception of the bass. So we aren't very good linguistically about being specific enough about that when we say it. It is omnidirectional to our ears in the sense that we can't pinpoint where the bass came from for two reasons. One, we're never hearing the bass that made a direct line from the subwoofer to our ears. The wavelengths are too long for that. But the other major one is that the separation between our two ears, the distance between our two ears, which is the primary way that we tell where a sound came from, by triangulating it, right? There's a point source somewhere over there, and the time it takes to get to my left ear is slightly different from the time it takes to get to my right ear, and my brain triangulates the position of the sound based on that. But it can't do that with deep bass waves because they're way longer than the distance between our two ears. The quarter wavelength is way longer than the distance between our two ears. So to our brain, they're effectively arriving at the same time to our two ears all the time, so we can't tell where it is. So it's perceptually omnidirectional, but not genuinely omnidirectional. There is a direction to the propagation of the sound. So I think that was a major part of the context that was missing, and I can see why that would wrinkle anybody's brain. It isn't literally omnidirectional, so that's an important thing to say.
Infinite Gary. When it comes to seeing distance from the screen, Gary prefers to sit far enough back that he doesn't have to move his eyes or his head to take in the entire image. His main home theater In his main home theater, he settled on what works out to be a 42.8 degree field of view. Well, get more precise, my man. Don't.
I mean, he just told me his screen size and distance. I worked that out.
Oh, okay. So he knows some people prefer to sit quite a bit closer, and of course that's fine if that's what they like, but Gary is curious about two things. When it comes to human vision, how much of the image are you missing if you sit closer than what he prefers? Like, say you prefer a field of view that's 50 degrees compared to his 42.8. What percentage of the image is now missing from your line of sight? I should take a break, I think, and just let you answer all these questions, because I don't know.
Well, so I mean, what is missing from your vision at that point is nothing. You would be able to perceive that the entire image is there. I've got a little graphic here that I just borrowed from Wikipedia that is our approximate field of vision. Now, this varies somewhat. Some people have a little bit more peripheral vision than others. So this horizontal field of view that humans tend to have is somewhere in the 110 to 135 degree range, where, you know, just testing people's peripheral vision, you have some perception of there being an image coming in from, you know, as much as 110 to 135 degree spread, and then it's around 100 degree spread vertically that we have where we're taking in information. But that, of course, doesn't mean we're able to focus on everything within that large field of view. That's our peripheral vision. So this is exactly why it's very personal and subjective about what seating distance you prefer, because some people like to have a greater portion of the image within their focused line of sight. Now, our very focused line of sight, like where we're able to actually read text, you know, from a standard book, that's like 6 to 7 degrees per eye. It's maybe 10 to 14 degrees between our two eyes if your brain is even able to perceive that. But it's a pretty narrow angle where we're able to like make out vision as cleanly as reading text. We tend to say, like, well, especially in a movie, right? We're going to focus on, well, can I like see somebody's face and recognize them? We care more about that. We might not have to be able to read text that's written somewhere, but we want to be able to recognize a face or something like that. That's very approximate, but it's going to be a little bit wider than the text range, but not nearly as wide as our peripheral range. It's going to be somewhere closer to like the 20 degree type of range or something like that. Now, we don't perceive that we're always moving our eyes a little bit. We can't help it. We don't like literally just focus our eyes straight forward and they don't move whatsoever, where it's imperceptible to us, but our eyes are always moving a bit. So it's going to be something in that sort of 20 degree range, and that's going to be focused in the middle of the image, you know. So in your case, yeah, about half of the image or so is into your peripheral vision, and you'd have to move your eyes a little bit if someone's like, I think you would notice, right? If they sat a character right on the very left edge of the screen, you probably would move your eyes even with your preferred field of view, because their face wouldn't be in focus if you stared straight ahead at that moment. And that's pretty reasonable. So it's going to be around 20 degree angle or so is where faces are going to be in focus. It's going to be very comfortable if about a half of the image, just like you say, is within our peripheral vision, because most things are centered in the frame. That's the way most cinematographers do it. And it just means that if you sit a lot closer and have a bigger field of view, more of that image is going to be into your peripheral field. But it's not like you're missing the image entirely until you go beyond 135 degrees.
Right. So what did the cinematographers and directors actually intend? They are clearly framing their shots with an intention in mind. Aren't they expecting the entire shot to be seen as a whole? If you're having to move your eyes and head, doesn't that automatically mean you're always missing something in the frame and therefore violating the creator's intent? Not the boss of me. I can put my eyes where I want to. You know.
No, and there's differences, right? I mean, like I've mentioned, there's some movies, like I just mentioned Barbie, where I feel that movie, the way it was shot on the director and the cinematographer's intent, it works. It feels better when it takes up a larger, like even for my taste, larger than I normally sit field of view. It somehow just feels better when there's more into my peripheral vision and less in my direct focus. And I mentioned like X2, X-Men United, I felt that way as well. Then there's other movies where I'm like, oh, I really prefer to sit a little farther back and have a greater percentage of this image within my focused field of view. There's some movies that I prefer on a smaller television screen. So I don't think there's one size fits all whatsoever. And then that's my subjective experience, and someone else's is going to be different. So I don't think there's one size fits all at all.
Toke in Denmark. Toke has an LG B6 OLED that's old enough to have that only has HDMI ARC, not HDMI eARC. For streaming, he uses a Chromecast with Google TV, and he plugs that straight into his TV, which then sends the audio to his NAD. T758V3 receiver via HDMI ARC. By default, his Chromecast always sets itself to 2.0 stereo output. You can manually change it to send 5.1 Dolby Digital, and that works perfectly fine. He's guessing the default stereo audio selection is just due to the age of his TV. I don't know.
I mean, it really shouldn't be, because the B6 definitely has a 5.1 Dolby Digital decoder in it, as a Dolby Digital Plus decoder in it. So that shouldn't be the reason. Definitely shouldn't be.
In any case, you'll often end up with a 2.0 stereo playing at first until he manually switches to 5.1 Dolby Digital. And when that happens, he's noticed that the bass is considerably quieter with the 2.0 stereo version as compared to the stronger, louder bass from the 5.1 Dolby Digital version. He's made sure all of his speakers set to small, and his subwoofer is always playing, even with the 2.0 stereo content. So is the 2.0 stereo signal just throwing away the LFE channel? Or is there some other reason for the bass being weaker in the stereo version versus the 5.1 version? They may be completely different mixes, my man.
Definitely.
That would be my first guess. Almost certainly, because generally speaking, what I find when I go between different versions of audio or even video is that audio tends to get quieter the higher up you go, if that makes sense. And the reason being, at least in my thought process has always been, as you go up, meaning as like if I'm watching a YouTube stream, which is almost always in stereo anyways, and I go from I had like a internet hiccup, and it's now playing at 360p or something stupid like that. And then I'm like, oh, what is that? Why is everything all blurry? And then I move it up to manually force it to go into high res. My audio goes down in volume, and that's just a bandwidth in my mind. That's just a bandwidth issue. They're like, oh, you want all this video resolution? Sorry, we're gonna have to compress your audio. So I would guess that this is just a completely different mix, and that mix is more focused on TV speakers and things that don't have bass.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily think that they're throwing away the LFE channel. I just think it's a mix. It's a completely different mix.
Yeah, well, like the thing is, so if you're setting your Chromecast, or you haven't set it, but it has set itself to just always output stereo. So it will be taking the stereo signal from whatever streaming service you're using. So exactly like Tom said, that could be a different mix, but it isn't. What it isn't doing is taking a Dolby Digital 5.1 mix and down mixing itself. Itself to stereo. It's not like sending a 5.1 Dolby Digital signal to your receiver and then putting your receiver into stereo listening mode, right? That's where the original signal was 5.1, it got to your receiver, and then the receiver down mixed it, and it will not throw away the 0.1 LFE track. It will just down mix it into two full range signals. That's what it would do. And then can apply bass management and still play it from a subwoofer and all those things that an AV receiver do. But in this case, it is only outputting a stereo signal to begin with. So it's going to be whatever it got from the streaming service. But beyond that, I do have a suspicion, because this is the default on Chromecasts. By default, they have dynamic range compression applied. And that is on the stereo signal, because when you output Dolby Digital 5.1, it just outputs the bit stream. It just takes the signal and throws it out of the player and lets your AV receiver handle thing, and doesn't decode it or apply processing to it. For the stereo signals, by default, it applies dynamic range compression. So that would be the setting to look for in the audio settings, to turn off your dynamic range compression. And I'll bet you even with the stereo signals, the bass sounds louder then, because it isn't dynamically compressing everything, which is what it wants to do by default.
There you go.
Yeah.
Toke had his 4 on-wall subwoofers arranged on his walls in 2 stacked pairs, as we've discussed previously. Prior to using an EQ, they do not measure flat in their response down to 20 hertz. He needs to apply some EQ to bring down the output from around 50 to 60 hertz on up, and bring in a 20 hertz output. Bringing up the 20 hertz output a bit. But after that, they measure nice and flat. But he's always considering new ideas, and he came across the notion of adding physical weight to the subwoofer drivers themselves. Via calculated simulation, just increasing the mass of his drivers in a subwoofer design tool, it appears that adding 5 to 10 grams to each driver would increase his 20 hertz output by 2 to 3 dB, while at the same time drastically reducing their output above 60 Hz, and also adding a significant amount of ringing right at the resonant frequency of the drivers themselves. What? Why would you want to add ringing? But whatever. That piqued his curiosity. It didn't pique mine. I'll be honest with you. If I had read that, I'd be like, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm never doing that." But maybe I'm missing the boat here, because you're piqued. That piqued his curiosity, so he went searching, but couldn't find any good data from anybody who has tried it. There's your indication that this is a dumb idea. And the most discussion you could find was just people saying that they never actually went through with it. Do we have any insight about this subject? If we were to add mass to a subwoofer drivers, would that give him the higher frequency reduction and 20 Hertz boost that he is currently achieving via EQ? And then he could just use EQ to tame the increased ringing at the driver's resonant frequency. Let me trade one problem for a different problem. And in the effort of doing this, let me risk voiding my subwoofer's warranty and also breaking everything.
And I mean, I'm assuming this would be like some sort of spray application.
Oh my God. Can you imagine putting like rhino stuff on your for your truck liner on here?
It's going to do more than just increase the mass of the driver. There are other things that it's going to do physically to the driver by applying.
Terrible idea.
I would definitely not do this. So, I mean, in the simulation and the calculators, they're just saying, okay, here are the parameters of my driver, and you just increase the mass, right? You just, in that calculator, like, okay, this driver that I'm simulating and calculating, it's heavier than the driver started out as. Okay, that's easy to do in a calculator in a simulation. Sure. To actually change nothing besides the mass of your driver, like you haven't changed the damping property, you haven't changed it's damping, right? How much it rings, like to change nothing else, the surface texture of it, balance of it, the center of gravity of it, to change nothing else besides just increasing the mass in real life.
How are you going to do that and not off? Yeah. I mean, because the driver goes in and out, on a pole, right? That is controlled by electromagnets and everything else. How are you going to ensure that it's going to stay balanced and not in some way create
wobbling?
A wobble, which I mean, just the amount of audacity that somebody would have to think that they can make this modification and not cause any more problems in the effort is phenomenal to me. Like, I wish I had that kind of confidence. My 17-year-old who just confidently walked through this room and got some stuff out of the refrigerator and left the door, and he probably thought as he walked out, nailed it, didn't make a sound. Oh my God. If you guys are all looking around wondering who's in your house right now, it's my son. It's my son. There's a
question whether he actually was thinking about how much he cared that he made noise.
Yeah, that might be me giving him too much credit. Let me tell you what, that apple has not fallen far from the tree, and that is one narcissistic SOB. I'm going to be honest with you. If it doesn't affect him directly and immediately, it is not in his head. So
Tom has had distractions throughout this episode. So look, realistically, this is absolutely not something I would do or recommend. You have achieved really good results using EQ. Stand pat. There isn't much need to go altering things, especially in this particular, and I think this was more of an academic question than him really thinking about it. But yes, the whole idea of in the calculated simulation, if you increase the mass of the driver, but you have changed no other parameters, you kept the same box, you kept the same amplifier, then a heavier driver will have greater output at a lower frequency and less output at a higher frequency. That is a thing that's going to happen. That's exactly what the calculator told you. But of course, in the calculator, you are able to change one parameter and one parameter only without it impacting any of the other parameters, and in real life you cannot do that. In real life, other parameters will also change. You haven't factored those in, and it just is not going to be worth trying to do this in real life.
Yeah. So the other thing I just want to bring up here, and it's something that I think bears remembering whenever we come across these modifications to speakers and subwoofers and amplifiers and all kinds of other things where people are like, oh, I did this and now it sounds so much better. SVS, when they brought out their Pro line and the line before that, they went through 25 plus prototypes of drivers before they settled on one that had enough of the qualities that they needed in order for them to DSP out the rest that was bad. And then you're just going to come on and go, I found an online calculator that shows that this is going to be so much better if I just spray some truck liner on it. Yeah.
Or I would love to see someone just take a 5-gram weight and like super glue
it to the middle.
You know, yeah, that's not going to change the center of gravity or anything.
So, I mean, the audacity to just think that, these people who have been making drivers and subwoofers for decades. I've got my electrical engineering degree from google.com, so let me just tell you how to make this thing better. Yeah, don't do this, my man. I mean, I don't think you were going to, but at the same time,
I know.
that is
a couple of blobs of hot glue and we're in business.
We're in business. What could possibly go wrong?
That's right.
Gurinder continues to work away on his basement home theater, which is now enclosed after having built a new wall. In the exposed ceiling, he has switched the HVAC ducts that feed the theater room to flex duct, but there's still a solid duct line that feeds the room upstairs, and he doesn't want to change that because it might make cleaning the ducts more difficult in the future if he did. Mm-hmm. I've never cleaned an HVAC duct in my whole life. I've never had one cleaned. I've never thought of cleaning
They're
one.
They're supposed to be cleaned.
It's never crossed my mind. I should maybe think about that, I guess. I don't know.
Well, in Canada, it's a much bigger deal because we run our heaters a lot more. So
yeah, my heater, you can hear my heater groaning as we turn it on for the first time.
That's right.
It's just like,
it's been a while.
What?
I gotta figure out how to get back up.
What's going on? So in the theater, he's going to be installing sound clips and hat channels to decouple the ceiling from the joist. He's hoping to end up with a much better soundproofing for the theater than he used to have with just a drop tile ceiling and an unenclosed space. So would it help if he put drywall directly against the ceiling joist just for that one joist bay with the solid duct within it? He's heard of the triple leaf effect and why you don't want to drywall the entire ceiling and then add sound clips and hat channels and another whole ceiling layer below that. I don't think I understand that sentence.
So like drywall right against the ceiling joists, as they are, then install sound clips and hat channels underneath that layer of drywall you just did, and then put another layer of drywall on the sound clips and hat channels. So now you have that level, the sound clips and hat channels, another level drywall, and then the flooring above that, giving you a triple leaf. And the reason you recommend never ever doing that is because that gap between the first level of ceiling drywall and then the sound clips and hat channels and the second level of ceiling drywall, that just becomes a resonating drum, and it makes things way worse than if you just didn't have the layer of drywall that's right against the ceiling joists. So bottom line, you would still have that.
Right.
You would still have that if you did that. You've just created a resonant drum for the joist bay where you want that the least. So you do not do it.
All right. Well, that's the answer to the question.
That's right. You just put in the sound clips and hat channels and the layer of drywall. You don't put 2 layers of drywall, one above the sound clips and hat channels and one below. You don't do that.
I mean, I guess if I was really worried about that particular joist, I wouldn't think to try to enclose it more. I think I would try
That's right.
I would put more insulation within it more than anything else. So he's got a bunch of 1/2-inch OSB on hand. OSB
oriented strand board.
There you go. And he was thinking he'd use that for his ceiling in his theater rather than buying all new drywall panels. He still intends to have the drop tile ceiling below this new sound clip and hat channel, whatever, plus the OSB ceiling. So the looks don't matter. Any concerns?
Yeah, fire safety. I don't know if that's allowed or not.
Right.
You'd want to check. I mean, that you can check with your city hall. You can check with them. It might be fine in a basement, but not in a top floor. I don't know. But yeah, fire safety I would want to check because, I mean, drywall has a fire rating. Whatever OSB's fire rating is, it might not be up to code. So you wouldn't want to go to all that. That'll cost you more if they ever inspect it or if you ever have an insurance claim. It'll cost you way more than to just get the drywall. I mean, this is a single room in a theater. The amount of drywall wouldn't be that crazy.
All right. He has installed manual dampers on the flex duct connections for the theater. They don't have a multi-room split HVAC system, so making the theater nice and cool results in the rest of the house being very cold. And it's a waste of AC to cool the theater if nobody's in there. So he used those dampeners to only air condition the theater when needed. That means he needs access. So what can he install into his new sound clip and hat channel ceiling that can get those dampers to those dampers when needed? I am totally confused as to why you would want to do this. So you're telling me that you're not going to AC or heat your home theater unless there's somebody in there?
Sounds like.
But why?
So that the rest of the house can use that.
The rest of the house is not going to get super cold unless you have the projector and everything else on. So it's not going to matter.
Well, no, he's saying like when nobody's in the theater, then they don't have to run the furnace or the air conditioner as hard because it isn't attempting to cool the theater.
How big is this theater? I mean,
I don't know.
How massive is it that it's going to affect the entire house? To me, it's like close the door and it won't. Don't put a thermometer in there or a thermostat like in there to do that. I mean, this is not something that.
But more than that, I mean, the ceiling's still open, so he could still change this because there are inline dampers. There's absolutely inline duct dampers, which is apparently what he's used. But there's also just registers that you can close.
Yeah.
Right? Like exposed, like there's still a register wherever the end of this duct line is. There's a register.
I've got two in my home theater that I could close if I wanted to. Which
I would.
Don't know that would make any difference, though. Right?
Well, I mean, it does alter the airflow in your house. I mean,
I know, but the airflow is controlled by a thermostat, which measures the temperature of the entire house, or wherever it is. So like if that room is creating extra cold or extra heat for some reason, and you close the dampeners down, it's not going to stop that room from doing whatever it's doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like if you cool the rest of the house to where it's comfortable, then the theater is going to be warmer than you want the theater to be. But when you're not in there, you don't care, right? And if you're heating the house, then the rest of the house is going to be a nice temperature. The theater is probably going to be warmer than that, but you don't care. Or it might be cooler than that, I suppose, right? Because the airflow is not getting there. But you don't care about that because you're not in there. So it's only when you're in the theater that the rest of the house gets colder than you want it to be or hotter than you want it to be. But that's going to be the case because the damper is going to be open when you're in the theater. So I have to, in the end, agree with Tom.
I think that you explained what you just said to us to your HVAC person. And if they get this really confused look upon their face and go, what are you talking about now?
It's actually more that when you're super cooling things because you're cooling the theater to where it's comfortable, you actually need dampers on the rest of your house.
Rest of the house.
On the theater, because you need to reduce the cold
airflow
all
the airflow to go into the home theater. Suddenly a blizzard in there, like the AC turns on and then like fog rolls into your home theater.
So two things. If you're just dead set on doing what you've already done, I guess you can leave the dampers that are there now rather than removing them, or if you're able to return them and just get registers that close and open, because then you don't have to deal with digging into your ceiling to open or close a damper. But I agree with Tom. I think this is actually backwards. You need the dampers on the rest of the house, not on the theater, because it's the theater that needs more airflow than the rest of the house when you're in the theater. It's backwards.
I think that this is unnecessary.
I'm really hoping we can do two more.
We'll see. Stan got himself a 65-inch LG G3 OLED with micro lens array. He knows that the Rutens post their picture settings that they use for the review process. So you just go with those, or there's some other resource for settings that he should check out? I just go with those.
Yeah, like honestly, I would just go with those. I think there's this idea of maybe I should try a variety, but the thing is with picture settings, there is accurate to the signal versus not.
Yeah.
And so Artings, once in a while I have a very minor quibble here or there, but I don't in the case of the G3. I looked through all their settings. I'm like, those all look good to me. And those are going to be accurate to the signal. So, the only thing I can say is Ratings always targets a 2.2 gamma for standard dynamic range. I would say that is probably what I want to target if I have some lights on in the room. If I have a pitch black room for standard dynamic range, I might want to choose gamma of 2.4. But I mean, depends on your room lighting thing. It's not that ratings is wrong in any way. That's just to be aware of. That's something they always target. But the rest of it, in terms of contrast, brightness, all the other settings, is going to be accurate to the signal. So then the only alternative is somebody posted their settings. They are purposefully inaccurate to the signal because that's the way they like it. You can do that yourself. Right. You don't need someone else to tell you a bunch of inaccurate settings. You need someone to tell you accurate settings as your starting point. And then if you prefer something else, by all means, it's your TV. Go right ahead. But to get to accurate settings, there's only going to be one set of correct settings, and ratings already has it. So there's really no need to look elsewhere.
Yeah. So the idea that some people have is that there's, and this is historically often been true, is that there's inaccuracies between TVs. So the same model of TV, from set to set might be slightly different and need slightly different settings. With the ratings, whatever they're called, settings is close enough that it will get you very, very much in the general direction of accurate, which means at that point you look at it, you go, I want a little bit darker. I want a little bit lighter.
Sure.
I want a little bit less red or something.
That's right.
And then you can kind of tweak it to your own specifications.
Yeah. And I mean, this is spoiling the answer a little bit for the second question here, but when ratings measure just the filmmaker mode, right, you just take the TV out of the box, you deactivate its eco power saving settings, and then you put it into filmmaker mode as your picture mode for standard dynamic range and high dynamic range. It's like you're done. All the settings are correct as soon as you've done filmmaker mode, and there's basically nothing else that you need to do.
So there you go. So he's considering hiring a professional calibrator. What's the ballpark cost, and how can he locate a calibrator in his area?
I'm gonna say you don't.
I know. I'm so sorry for the calibrator. We used to recommend them all the time. I used to recommend them all the time on this podcast.
And there's still some TVs where you do want to. Unfortunately, TCL's TVs this year, out of the box, they don't have any picture mode that's bang on, and so you kind of want to get a TCL 2023 TV calibrated, ideally, even though they're typically a little bit lower price. They're the one that need it, like the G3. Yeah. Like I say, you put it in filmmaker mode, and it's I don't know what you're really going to calibrate. You're there.
Yeah, and that's the case with a lot of things these days.
But to answer the questions as wrote, typically it's about $400 to $500 these days. That's pretty standard for a calibration, because they're going to be doing multiple modes as well. So there's a bit of time involved. So $400 to $500 is pretty standard. Some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, but it's sort of in that ballpark. And then if you just go to imagingscience.com, they have their list of ISF certified dealers, and that's one of the easiest ways. And again, ratings, they actually put together a whole huge database of professionally certified calibrators with their direct contact numbers there and what regions they serve. So that's another great resource. We'll have the links to both of those in the show notes.
There you go. JR completed his basement renovation in his new house, and now he has an enclosed theater room. Great. You're done.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
This was the one that was his daughter's living in the rest of the basement, and so he was trying to soundproof this thing, and he had a long hallway corridor from the exit door in the basement that ended up being created. That's now his front wall.
So he took our advice and positioned his SVS prime elevation speakers on the ceiling about 4 feet in front and then behind his main seats. That gives him better separation from floor-level speakers, and also following our advice, he still labeled them as front and rear heights. He's happy to report that all sounds better than the theater room he had set up in his old house. It's a bit smaller, but it's closer to being a rectangle. It's fully enclosed, so he's happy with how it's turned out, and he shared some photos. Yay!
It looks very nice in here. It's really, really nice.
Black and gray. A little bit of wood.
It is black and gray for sure. Very neutral tones in here. Not going to be shifting the colors on your screen whatsoever in your perception. He also has some nice placards on the side wall there for his Macintosh processor, his Dolby Vision and Atmos and SVS with his cylinder subs that we can see prominently featured at the midpoints of his two side walls, right on either side of his seats.
These fisheye lens things are throwing me off.
Right.
Yeah. You like the SVS subs, though, that's for sure. He's got the
There's a little bench seat at the back serving as a pseudo back row, I guess. Maybe he's planning to replace that or maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, definitely the primary seats or his nice couch that's right there. Positioned very nicely between his two cylinders.
We're getting rid of the little couch we had on the back wall of our home theater. We thought we were already threw it out. So I don't know what's going to go there now. So he's got his front corner bass traps, plenty of panels on his ceiling, which are quite thick, and his sidewall panels and a soffit trap on the back wall against the ceiling. It already sounds great in there. So would there be any benefit to adding more bass trap panels on his back wall? He was thinking he might add a couple of 2x4 by 4 inch thick DIY panels from Acoustimac. I mean, I'm so very rarely going to say don't add more panels. That I do think that the back of the room and to the sides do look a little bare as far as acoustic treatments, and I would be a little concerned about slap echoes. Not total. I mean, I doubt you're going to hear it.
Distance from the back of his main seats to the physical back wall, so the chances of like dialogue problems from the back wall is very
dialogue
low.
Intelligibility is not going to be an issue because of that distance, but at the same time, it's there can be a slight muddying of the sound from all the reflections back there, and it is sort of a smaller space back there.
That's right. It narrows a bit at the back of the room.
I would be thinking about putting panels to the sides of my surround back speakers that you have back there, as well as on like one between it on the back wall, or maybe across the top, on top of those two speakers. I would think about putting something back there. Yeah,
like we quite often say, in acoustically small spaces, and your room would definitely count, you basically cannot have too much bass trapping. So there's no downside if you did it. There's really no downside. By the same token, if you added a couple of bass trap panels to your back wall and came back and said, I really did not notice any audible difference, that would not shock us whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like if you're like, did it really benefit anything? And you're like, I don't really think so. I don't really notice it. I'm like, yeah, that's probably the case. Like, this is more based on your seating location really being very good.
Yeah.
You've set yourself up nicely where if you don't treat that back wall, I'm not anticipating that there's going to be some kind of drastic audible difference, but there can essentially be no downside to you doing it. There could be a slight
monetary downside, yes. Yeah.
And a monetary downside. Yeah. So I mean, if you were already angling towards doing it anyway, I can say there's no downside, there's a potential small upside, but don't expect some kind of life-altering difference.
Right. This is one of those times where I'm like, if it were me, I would do it, and I don't know that I would notice a difference, but that would make me feel better as a human being.
That's right. That's right.
And if you're asking me if I think you should do it, the answer is probably. But if you said I did it and I don't really hear anything, I'd be like, yeah, that can happen.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with Rob on this one. So he has one of the old Radio Shack SPL meters on hand. He's wondering if he can use that to take some measurements of his bass output to really dial in his dual cylinder subwoofers. He found a set of bass sweeps on Tidal, as well as 30-second tones in 5 hertz increments. Could he use those? What would be the process? Should he put the SPL meter on a tripod using the threaded insert? Where should the SPL meter be aiming? And should it go at its primary seat at the seated ear? And it should go at the primary seated ear height, correct? What should be the weighting and response settings on the SPL meter? And how loud should he set the volume on his Macintosh receiver? When he's playing the test tones, should he be aiming for an 80 dB reading on the SPL meter across all of the test tones? First of all, the Radio Shack SPL meter was never super accurate in the bass, so I don't know that you're gonna really want to do this. What
you're proposing to use this for? Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah. That's why I didn't bother separating each individual question, because the cumulative answer is, for dialing in dual subwoofer bass, an SPL meter on its own is not the tool you would want to use. You're going to have quite varying readings of the deep bass below 80 hertz. That is not accurate, right? Like, that's what the SPL meter can tell you, but it's not actually accurate. So it becomes really kind of useless to try and do it just with test tones in the SPL meter. Now, you can connect your Radio Shack SPL meter. It has an RCA mono output.
It does, yes.
So you would need a little adapter, but you could connect it to your computer. So you'd need a little like RCA preamplifier to turn that into a USB signal. You could connect it to your computer and use Room EQ Wizard to take measurements, because built right into Room EQ Wizard is a correction file for a Radio Shack SPL meter. The Radio Shack SPL meter, one of the reasons we liked it is because even though it wasn't necessarily accurate, it was consistent. So
consistently
when it was
inaccurate. Yes.
That's right. So when it was comparing one thing to another, at least it was consistently inaccurate, so you could rely on the difference that it told you. And Room EQ Wizard, being aware of what the inaccuracies are, it can correct for it in the software. So doing it manually, I would not recommend, but you could use it, because if you're just like, look, this is kind of a fun activity, I don't want to invest about $100 in a UMic 1, although I would recommend, if you're willing to spend about $100, that you go ahead and get a UMic 1 and get one with a fantastic calibration file from our friends over at Cross Spectrum Labs, because they barely charge us an upside for that service to give you a really accurate calibration file for that specific UMic 1, not a batch correction file that you would get directly. It's like specifically for that one, they measure it and correct it. So yeah, around, what is it, $110, I think?
It's about
Herb is
that.
charging right now over at Cross Spectrum Labs.
I think the mic itself is like $80 or $90 anyway. That's right. So it's not that big of a premium.
Yeah. So if you want to do it, that's what I would recommend. It's easier to connect to your computer anyway, and then you will have very, very accurate readings. Now, again, if your purpose in all of this is to measure dual subwoofers and dial them into perfection, then you are going to want to be taking more accurate measurements than 5 hertz increments, than something that's coming through Tidal where we can't be 100% sure what any sort of compression or streaming or anything like that would be. So I think what he was getting at is, he's probably heard about Room EQ Wizard. He's been like, I don't want to learn all that. That seems like a bit of a hassle, which I completely understand and agree with. But if you want to dial in dual subwoofers to this extent of relying on measurements to do it instead of just doing it by ear, that's what you would really want to do. That would be the proper way to do it. And I wouldn't want to rely on just playing some test tones from Tidal and reading it on an SPL meter. So, since we're running short on time, I'm not going to go through the whole process of what you would do in Room EQ Wizard if you want to learn about that.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. There's an article posted on avgadgets.com about that. There are previous episodes that we've talked about the process, but also we're happy to go through it again if you want to re-ask the question for a future week. But I'm not going to make the assumption that you want to go through all of that right now. But the other thing that I wanted to note is, if you are just going to use an SPL meter to do some trim level measurements or something like that, you just want to double check what your room correction did or something like that. Yes, you want to put it on a tripod. You don't just want to hold it in your human hand, and you want to actually point the little sensor straight up at the ceiling. You're not aiming it at each individual speaker or aiming it at forward or back or anything. It's straight up at the ceiling. So that's something we can mention. And the last thing I'll say is, if you are going to do any sort of measurements for your subwoofers, it would not be just your primary seat that you measure. Quite critically, you have to measure in multiple locations. The whole goal of dual subwoofer setup is not to measure in one location and get good response there and call it a day. It is to measure in, like, you've got a 3-seater couch, measure in each of those 3 seats and get uniformity across those 3 seats. That means when you apply EQ, it's going to be applied equally to all of those seats across the couch, not just one seat. And that's the real goal. That's what you're actually trying to do when you're calibrating dual subs. So those are a couple of things to be aware of. And I think he'll probably be writing back or saying, you know what, forget it. I can listen to the sweeps by ear and it all sounds pretty good, and I'm going to call it a day.
So let's just, before we go on to the very last part of this question, look at your room. Look at your subwoofer placement, and then realize that the chances of you needed to do this is extremely low.
That is the other big factor in this is you have, so look, not a perfect rectangle, but pretty close to it.
Close enough.
You have ideally placed your subwoofers within this room at the midpoints of the 2 side walls. Chances are you could fiddle with this till the cows come home, but if you were honest and you listened to an A/B, if you were able to store 2 settings like that, you'd be like, oh, I went through all of that for nothing.
Yeah.
You've basically done what you need to do physically.
I know it's
that the
hard,
chances of having to change it are
there is some part of you that says, just setting the subs up properly can't be all I need to do, can it? And you're like, bass is so weird. And doesn't act, I mean, it's very similar to me saying, oh, I don't have to just put my 2 front speakers wider than me and get stereo sound, do I? I mean, surely I must have to fiddle with them a little bit to get it to work right. And you realize, I don't know. I mean, I could tow them in, I could not tow them in. I still get stereo sound. Does it change a little bit if I futz with them? Yeah, it does. But, you know, it doesn't go from being stereo to not being stereo.
That's right.
It just goes from being a little bit better or a little bit worse.
We've gone from, you know, over a decade ago of one subwoofer and stick it in a corner to now just the completely opposite direction of being like, oh, there's all this measurement and everything you got to do. And we're like, no, you actually can sometimes land in the middle. It is possible to land in the middle.
Yeah. So he's got fully variable phase adjustment on his SVS PC2000 sub. So how does he use that to adjust any peaks and dips he might find via his measurements? Well, if you use RumiQ Wizard, it's going to do a bunch of that for you. But what you're gonna do is you're gonna leave that alone and just go back to watching movies and not worrying about this.
What I can say, because I mean so my 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers, the reason I wrote it the way that I did was exactly for the people who don't want to do a whole bunch of measurements and dig into it that much, but still want to optimize a dual subwoofer setup. And honestly, you're probably only going to need steps 1 through 4, and you're going to be able to stop.
You'll be done.
And that's actually before all of the phased-up adjustment stuff, because you've done the physically optimal placement. Yeah. So this is probably not going to be a 12-step guide for you.
You need to get with that other guy and talk about phase of your subwoofer, since they're both down firing. Right. Are they in phase or not? They're across the room from each other. It's all very confusing.
Flip one of them upside down and drive yourself nuts.
There you go.
But the whole rest of my 12-step guide, the reason I wrote it for less than physically optimal placement was to do it in a way that did not require you to buy anything besides what you already own, and to do any measurements like that, to be able to do it by ear. Because ultimately that is what matters, is you're able to play a bass sweep through your system, and regardless of which of the seats you sit in across your 3-seater couch, that bass sweep sounds the same in each of your seats. That's the goal, and you can do it without measuring. It's possible to do. So, well, I'll link to my 12-step guide once again, and I think, based on what he asked about the SPL meter and not really wanting to dig into RumiQ Wizard, that's going to be the better method for you.
The answer to this question is leave it alone. You did fine. Yes. Let's do Ryan's question really quick, because I don't think there's much to it. Ryan recently joined the Parents' Council at his daughter's school. I guess that's kind of like the PSA or PTSA or PTA, whatever. Anyways.
Although that's Parents and Teachers Association. So no, this is just the Parents' Council at his school.
I don't know what that means. So he's mentioned he's into audio and speakers and such, and so he said he could help them with picking out an outdoor speaker setup and an indoor speaker setup, but now he's hoping we can help him. Sounds like we joined and not you. He doesn't have a figure for the budget, but they aren't looking for the cheapest thing possible. That's what they say until you give them the budget, and then they're going to want the cheapest thing possible. They want something decent. It needs to be used as a PA system with a microphone. They would want to be able to speak to a large group of students outdoors, and their old system definitely wasn't loud enough, so that's their #1 requirement. And then they also want a much smaller portable system to use indoors to take from classroom to classroom. The systems don't necessarily need to come with microphones already attached, but that is the intended purpose. They might also want to be able to connect to other sources to play music or presentations. He looked around a bit and found the JBL party boxes. Is he on the right track, or should he suggest something else?
I'm going to suggest something else.
There you go. Rob's got something else.
I sure do. I think, so look, regardless, I don't know, maybe he's in a really affluent area and they're like, $20,000 sounds like a perfectly reasonable solution for this, but I'm going to assume that they want to spend closer to as little as possible versus not a crazy amount. Behringer makes a wonderful selection of PA systems that are nice and affordable, I think, relatively cost-effective, and do a really good job for this. They're available over at sweetwater.com. They're definitely a place to go. I'm going to say, before you go ahead and commit to any of these or recommend them directly, go ahead and call and talk to some of the people at Sweetwater. They really know their stuff. They give really good advice, and they're going to make sure you get everything that you need for this system, because what I'm recommending is going to come with the speakers themselves, the amplification and connections that you need, and a single microphone. That's all together in these bundles that I'm going to mention. But if you want something like stands for the speakers when they're outdoors, Sweetwater can make sure you get the correct stands that are going to work for these PA speakers. If you want more than one one microphone to connect, because all of these systems are able to connect more than one microphone. They're going to be able to help you out with that if you need any additional cables, stuff like that. So call Sweetwater before committing to any of this, or get whoever is in charge of purchasing to call. But here are some recommendations. So first up, for the outdoor system, I would suggest Behringer's EPS 500 MP3, and yes, it's got like Bluetooth and plays MP3s and stuff like that. But these are a couple of 8-inch self-powered speakers with compression horn-loaded tweeters. They can play very, very loud, and I think it's 300 watts per channel, or 250 because it's the 500 there. 250 per channel in there. Comes with a microphone, comes with a mixing board. Now, one thing that I like about this is I wouldn't call this like a, pick it up by the handle portable system. It's not meant to be for the outdoor PA that you're talking about, a fairly large group outdoors, but it is a very transportable system. There's actually compartments in the backs of these speakers that house the mixing board, and I think there's even a place to like clip in the microphone. So it's like transporting these things around is really quite simple. They do need to be plugged into a wall. You will need to run an extension cord and plug in power. If you're looking for the sort of output that we're talking about, a PA system outdoors, it's going to have to be plugged in. I mean, there are some battery-powered ones, but they start getting really, really crazy expensive. So you can plug in 4 microphones simultaneously to this. If you want wireless microphones, again, talk to Sweetwater, because Behringer has wireless mics that are like ready to go with these systems, and they aren't crazy expensive. So that's another thing you might talk to, but this one comes with one microphone if that's all you need, a wired one that you connect. Everything that you need there, like I say, you might need speaker stands for them, but that's a really good solution, and it's $530. So is it like the absolute cheapest thing ever? I guess not, but it's pretty reasonable as far as PA systems go. For the one that you want to take from classroom to classroom, sticking with Behringer, their MPA 40 BT, it's exactly what you want, and it's battery powered. So it's very much portable from room to room. You don't even have to plug it in. The battery lasts for 12 hours, so it should get you through a class, a school day. $220. It's a single speaker that you pick up and go. Like I say, it's battery powered on a full charge, lasts 12 hours. Microphone comes with it, so I can't imagine you really need a ton more than that, but you can plug in a second microphone if you purchase one, and it has regular RCA jacks and Bluetooth, so whatever else they want to connect to it, they should be able to do so. $220, I don't think you can really do a whole lot better than that, but again, talk to Sweetwater before the purchase, but that's where I would point you.
The one thing I'm going to suggest is that you are going to want to see any and all things that they may want to plug into this thing.
True.
Before you make any purchases, and just make note of the inputs type of inputs you will need, and any cables that you may need that they don't have. So, I mean, there's going to be an AV person there, or an IT person there that's going to be in control of all this stuff, and just schedule a meeting and come to school and take a look at all of it, because that's the number one thing you're going to want to make sure, because they're going to tell you, oh yeah, I'm just going to connect in this DVD player or this Blu-ray player, and you're going to be like, oh, okay, so it needs HDMI, or it needs RCA, or it needs something like that, and you're going to go see the player, and it's some weird thing that's not what you thought it was, and everything else. So with proprietary, it's like somebody's old Samsung all-in-one system. It would be a little bit
shocking from a disc player to not at least have like stereo RCA
One
jacks,
would
if
think,
nothing else.
But these are schools, and they live in a different reality than the rest of the world. So,
and there are definitely players that have nothing but an HDMI port these days. So that would be something you'd need an adapter if that's what you're dealing with. True.
Yeah. Yep. So just make a list of everything they may want to plug in there, and then afterwards, when they come to me, I tried to plug in this and it doesn't work. I'm like, yeah, I asked you what you're going to plug in, and that was not on the list, and therefore that's on you.
And I mean, I mentioned those two in particular because to me they're the ones that like it's a combo package. It's got everything you need. I would pretty, if not at least pretty close, reasonably priced. But I mean, there are larger and smaller PA systems from Behringer and other brands as well. But I mean, Behringer's a really good value brand for what you're talking about. So there are larger and smaller PA systems, of course. But I think those are at least a good starting point for some reference. And you talk to the people at Sweetwater and they'll sort you out.
All right, who do we have left?
We have on our list Jared, Henry, and Jason. So you guys will be up first next week.
All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Paul. We want to thank Paul for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 135 patrons over at patreon.com, including Aras.
That is correct, Paul. Thank you very much for your PayPal donation and patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 135 patrons over there. Aras, thank you for being one of them.
Also want to thank those who sent in notes of gratitude, including Ryan, Dave, Kris, Jim, Toke, Robin, Jason, and Aras. Thank you for thanking us.
Yeah, Ryan, Dave, Kris, Jim, Toke, Rob, Jason, Aras, thank you all very much for those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We certainly appreciate them. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.